The horse beneath Caleb Ward moved with the tired rhythm of something that had traveled too far, too long. Dust clung to the animal's flanks like a second skin, and the man in the saddle wore the same coating, bronze from the sun, gray from the road, indistinguishable from the land itself. His hat brim was pulled low, shadowing eyes that had seen more than most men twice his age, and his hands rested loose on the reins, deceptively casual. Everything about him suggested a man passing through, wanting nothing, expecting less. The town of Redemption Springs rose from the flatland like a broken promise. Its main street was a thread of packed earth flanked by weathered buildings that leaned into each other as if holding one another upright. A church steeple pointed accusingly at heaven, but the paint had long since peeled away, leaving naked wood to crack under the merciless sun. The saloon squatted at the street's far end, its porch sagging under the weight of men who had nowhere better to be. Smoke curled from a blacksmith's forge, and somewhere a dog barked without conviction. Caleb had seen 100 towns exactly like this one, places where hope came to die quietly. He guided his horse toward the general store, dismounting with the fluid economy of movement that marked a man accustomed to saddles and long silences. His boots hit the ground without sound, and he looped the reins around the hitching post with hands that bore old scars across the knuckles, the kind that came from fists, not accidents. The plan was simple. Supplies. Water. Maybe a hot meal if the place wasn't charging robbery prices. Then back on the road before the sun started its westward descent. He had land waiting 2 days north, 100 acres of nothing that belonged to him, and demanded nothing in return except sweat and solitude. That was the bargain he'd made with himself 5 years ago, and he'd kept it faithfully. No complications, no entanglements, no reason to stay anywhere longer than necessity demanded. He was reaching for the store's door handle when the sound stopped him. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was the quietness of it that made his hand freeze mid-motion. A woman's voice, tight with controlled fear, speaking words he couldn't quite make out. Then a man's laugh, the kind that had cruelty woven through it like thread through fabric. Caleb's jaw tightened. Not your problem, he told himself. Whatever was happening around the corner of that building was between people who lived here, people who had chosen to make this dying town their home. He was just passing through. His hand closed on the door handle. The woman's voice came again, sharper now. I've told you no. I'll keep telling you no. That's not how this works, sweetheart. The man's voice was thick, self-satisfied. Your daddy's debts don't disappear just because he did. You owe, and I'm here to collect. Caleb released the door handle. He told himself he was just curious, that he'd glance around the corner, assess the situation, and move on. It was none of his business how people conducted their affairs in Redemption Springs. He'd learned that lesson the hard way in a dozen other forgotten towns. Getting involved only ever made things worse, but his feet carried him toward the alley anyway. The scene that greeted him was exactly what he'd expected and somehow worse for its familiarity. A woman stood with her back against the alley wall, one hand gripping a worn leather satchel, the other pressed flat against the sun-bleached boards behind her as if she could push through them and escape. She was young, maybe 25, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun that was coming loose at the edges. Her dress was simple, faded blue cotton, mended in places, and her eyes blazed with the kind of defiance that came from desperation rather than confidence. The man looming over her was built like a bull, thick through the shoulders and chest, with a gut that suggested too many years of taking what he wanted without effort. His face was florid, shining with sweat despite the shade of the alley, and his hands were curled into fists the size of ham hocks. He wore a tin star on his vest, tarnished and crooked. Town deputy, Caleb registered, which meant the law here was already compromised. 2 more men flanked the deputy, cut from cheaper cloth but no less threatening. They wore the slack expressions of hired muscle, men who followed orders because thinking for themselves required too much effort. You've got 1 week, Lila. The deputy leaned closer, and the woman, Lila, pressed harder against the wall. 1 week to accept my brother's proposal, or the bank forecloses on that pretty little property your daddy left you? And then where will you be? Teaching school in some tent city? Washing clothes for minors? I'll find a way. Lila's voice shook, but she didn't look away. I'll pay what's owed. But I won't marry Clayton Briggs. Not for land, Not for money, not for anything. The deputy's laugh was ugly. You think you got choices here? You think this is some fairy tale where the pretty schoolteacher gets to pick her prince? He reached out, and his thick fingers caught a strand of her hair that had escaped its pins. My brother wants you. And what Clayton wants, Clayton gets. That's how things work in Redemption Springs. Maybe that's how they worked yesterday. Caleb's voice cut through the alley like a knife through rot. All four heads swung toward him, and he saw the calculations happen in real time. The deputy's eyes narrowing, the two flanking men spreading slightly apart, Lila's expression shifting from fear to confusion to something that might have been hope. The deputy let his hand fall from Lila's hair, but his posture didn't change. This is a private conversation, friend. Best you move along. Didn't sound private. Caleb stepped fully into the alley, his hands hanging loose at his sides. Sounded like a man threatening a woman. Usually, that kind of thing happens in public. It stops being private. You got no idea what you're stepping into. The deputy's face darkened. This is town business, family business. And you... He looked Caleb up and down, taking in the trail dust, the worn gear, the horse standing patient at the hitching post. You're nobody, just another drifter who will be gone by morning. Maybe. Caleb's eyes hadn't left the deputy's face. But I'm here right now, and right now the lady said no. Seems pretty clear to me. One of the flanking men, the taller one with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, took a step forward. You want to bleed in this alley, stranger? Because that's where this is headed. Caleb smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. I've bled in worse places. Question is, are you sure you want to be the one who makes it happen? The moment stretched, taut as wire. The deputy's hand drifted toward the gun on his hip, and Caleb watched it with the focused calm of a man who'd been in this exact situation more times than he cared to count. He could read the deputy's body language like words on a page, the slight shift in weight, the tension gathering in the shoulders, the way his jaw clenched before making a move. But it was the second man, the one with nervous eyes and twitching fingers, who would move first. Caleb could see it in the way he kept glancing at the deputy, waiting for permission, eager to prove himself. Stand down! The deputy's voice cracked across the alley like a whip, stopping the nervous man mid-twitch. He kept his eyes on Caleb, measuring, calculating. You just made a real big mistake, friend. Real big. You have any idea who you're crossing? Don't know. Don't care. Caleb's voice was flat, disinterested. The lady's leaving. You're staying here. That's how this ends. For a moment, Caleb thought the deputy might actually draw. The man's fingers curled around his gun butt, and the air in the alley seemed to compress, growing thick and hard to breathe. Then slowly, the deputy's hand fell away. This ain't over. He pointed a thick finger at Caleb. You just bought yourself a world of trouble you can't even imagine. Clayton Briggs owns this town. The bank, the law, the land, all of it. And when he hears about this, then I guess I'll hear his complaints in person. Caleb gestured toward the mouth of the alley. Now, step aside. The deputy didn't move immediately. His face had gone purple with rage, and Caleb could see him wrestling with his pride, trying to decide if saving face was worth the risk. Finally, he jerked his head at his two companions and stepped back, giving Lila just enough space to slip past. She moved quickly, not running, but close to it, her satchel clutched against her chest like armor. When she reached Caleb's side, she paused, her eyes searching his face. Thank you, she whispered. You didn't have to. Keep moving, Caleb said quietly. This isn't finished. They walked together out of the alley and into the harsh sunlight of the main street. Caleb could feel eyes on them, townspeople watching from windows and doorways, their faces carefully neutral. This was a place that had learned not to take sides, he realized. A place where survival meant keeping your head down and your opinions to yourself. Lila stopped in front of a small building with a hand-painted sign reading "Schoolhouse" and turned to face him properly. Up close, he could see the fine lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her grip on the satchel. She was scared, terrified probably, but holding it together through sheer force of will. I'm Lila Harper, she said, extending her hand with formal precision. And you are? Caleb Ward. He shook her hand briefly, noting the calluses on her palm. teachers' hands, marked by chalk and hard work. You should get inside, lock your doors. That won't stop them. Lila's voice was steady now, resigned. Nothing stops the Briggs family in this town. They've been running things since before I was born. Deputy Briggs, Sheriff Briggs, they're all Clayton's brothers or cousins. The bank is owned by their uncle. The land office is managed by their nephew. She laughed, but it was a bitter sound. Welcome to Redemption Springs, Mr. Ward. Population 147 cowards and victims. And you? I don't know what I am anymore. She looked down at her hands. My father died 6 months ago. Heart gave out while he was trying to fix the schoolhouse roof. He left me the school, the house, and 20 acres of land. He also left me $15,000 in debt to Briggs Bank, money he borrowed for equipment that never arrived, for investments that never materialized. I've been teaching every day, paying every cent I can spare toward that debt, but it's like trying to empty the ocean with a teacup. And Clayton Briggs? Wants the land, wants me. Thinks if he marries me, he can claim both and write off the debt as a wedding gift to himself. Lila's eyes flashed with anger. He's 63 years old, Mr. Ward. He's buried 3 wives already, and he looks at me like I'm livestock he's planning to purchase. Caleb was quiet for a moment, processing. It was an old story, powerful man, desperate woman, debt as leverage. He'd seen variations of it in every territory from Texas to Montana. Usually the woman had no choice. Usually she bent or broke. But something about Lila Harper suggested she'd choose breaking over bending. How long until the bank forecloses? He asked. 7 days. Lila's voice was hollow. They've accelerated the terms, claiming my father violated some clause in the contract. The full balance is due, or they take everything. And then Clayton gets what he wants anyway. The land goes to auction, he buys it for pennies, and I'm left with nothing except the choice between accepting his proposal or leaving town with whatever I can carry. You got any family? Anyone who could help? No. The single word fell like a stone. My mother died when I was 12. I have an aunt in St. Louis, but she's barely surviving herself. My father was a good man, Mr. Ward, but he trusted the wrong people. He believed in second chances and handshake deals. The Briggs family saw him coming from a mile away. Caleb looked at the schoolhouse behind her, a modest building with a fresh coat of paint and flowers planted in window boxes. Someone cared about this place. Someone was trying to make something good exist in a town that had given up on goodness. You should leave, he said finally. Take what you can carry and go. Start over somewhere else. I can't. Lila's voice cracked, and for the first time he saw tears gathering in her eyes. This school is all I have. These children, most of them come from families poorer than mine. Their parents can't afford to send them to the territorial school 50 miles away. If I leave, there's no one to teach them. They'll grow up illiterate, trapped in the same cycles of poverty and ignorance that keep this town in chains. Better than getting buried here. Is it? She wiped her eyes angrily. I've asked myself that question every night for 6 months, Mr. Ward, and every morning I wake up and choose to stay. Maybe that makes me a fool. Maybe it makes me stubborn. But I can't abandon these children just to save myself. Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that noble intentions didn't stop bullets or foreclosures, that sometimes the only smart choice was to run and not look back. But the words stuck in his throat because he recognized something in her, the same stubborn refusal to surrender that had driven him through his own dark years. You said 7 days. He heard himself speaking before he'd fully decided to. What if you had more time? There is no more time. The contract is clear, 7 days, or what if someone paid the debt? Lila stared at him. The debt is $15,000, Mr. Ward. I'd need to teach for 20 years without spending a single penny to raise that kind of money. No one in this town has those resources except the Briggs family, and they're the ones holding the noose. I didn't ask if it was possible. I asked what would happen if someone did it. She studied his face, confusion giving way to something like suspicion. Who are you, really? No drifter carries that kind of money, and no stranger would even consider, I'm nobody special, Caleb cut her off. Just a man who made some choices a long time ago and ended up with more money than he needs and less humanity than he'd like. Answer the question. If the debt was paid, what happens to Clayton's leverage? It disappears. Lila's voice was barely a whisper. The land would be free and clear. I could refuse his proposal without consequences. I could stay. I could keep teaching. She shook her head. But that's fantasy, Mr. Ward. That's Caleb. What? My name's Caleb, and I don't deal in fantasy. He looked past her, down the main street to where the bank stood, a 2-story brick building that dominated the town like a fortress. I deal in facts. Fact 1, you need money. Fact 2, I have money. Fact 3, the Briggs family thinks they've won. I don't like bullies who think they've won. You can't be serious. Lila's face had gone pale. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why would you? Because I can. Caleb's voice was quiet but final. Because I watched my mother get pushed around by men like Clayton Briggs my whole childhood. Because I spent 10 years as a hired gun for people who used money as a weapon. And I got real good at taking that weapon away from them. Because I rode into this town planning to be gone by sundown. And instead, I'm standing here talking about paying off a stranger's debt, which means somewhere along the way, I stopped being as smart as I used to be. He turned to face her fully, and his eyes were hard, but not unkind. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to get my supplies, then I'm going to stable my horse. Then I'm going to find a place to sleep tonight, because leaving now would look like running, and I don't run from men like Deputy Briggs. Tomorrow morning, I'll visit the bank and we'll settle accounts. After that, he paused. After that, we'll see what Clayton Briggs does when his favorite toy gets taken away. This is insane, Lila's voice was shaking. You'll make enemies. Dangerous enemies. The Briggs family doesn't just own the law, they are the law. They'll find a way to hurt you, to hurt both of us. Let them try. Caleb's smile was wolfish. I've been hurt by better men than these. I'm still here. Lila opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she made no move to wipe them away. Why? The word came out broken. Please, I need to understand why a stranger would do this. Caleb considered lying, considered giving her some noble reason that would make sense of the decision he was making, one that confused even himself, but he'd spent too many years lying to others and himself, and he was tired of it. Because I'm tired, he said finally. Tired of watching good people get crushed by bad ones. Tired of riding through towns where everyone's given up. Tired of being the kind of man who sees injustice and rides past it because it's safer that way. He met her eyes. Maybe I'm trying to buy back a piece of my soul. Or maybe I just want to see what happens when someone finally stands up to the local tyrant. Either way, Miss Harper, you're getting your money. The only question is whether you're brave enough to use it. I don't know if I am. The honesty in her voice was raw. I've been scared for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to be anything else. Then I guess we'll find out together. Caleb tipped his hat and turned toward the general store, leaving Lila standing in front of the schoolhouse with tears on her face and hope struggling to life in her chest like a bird with broken wings, learning to fly again. The general store smelled like coffee, leather, and the peculiar mustiness that accumulates in places where goods sit too long on shelves. The proprietor was a thin man with nervous eyes who kept glancing toward the window as if expecting trouble to materialize at any moment. Help you? His voice was clipped, professional, but Caleb could hear the underlying tension. Supplies, coffee, flour, bacon, dried beans, ammunition for a Winchester and a Colt .45, oats for my horse. Caleb set coins on the counter. And information. The proprietor's hands moved efficiently, gathering items, but his eyes never quite met Caleb's. Information costs more than goods, stranger, especially the kind you're probably looking for. Fair enough. Caleb added more coins to the pile. Tell me about Clayton Briggs. The man's hands stopped moving. He looked at the coins, then at Caleb, then toward the window again. You the one who had words with Deputy Briggs in the alley. News travels fast. This is a small town with long ears and short memories. The proprietor resumed packing supplies, but his voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. You want my advice? Take your supplies and leave. Tonight. Don't wait for morning. I'm not much for taking advice. Tell me about Clayton. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, the proprietor sighed, a sound like air escaping from something deflating. Clayton Briggs came to Redemption Springs 30 years ago with nothing but a carpet bag and a smile that could charm birds from trees. Within 5 years, he owned the bank. Within 10, he owned half the land in the county. Within 20, he owned pretty much everything that matters, including most of the people. How? Loans with impossible terms, land deals that always favored him, investments that somehow only paid out when he was involved. The proprietor's voice was bitter. He's smart, I'll give him that. Never breaks the law, at least not in ways that can be proven. Always operates just inside the boundaries of legal, even when what he's doing is morally bankrupt. And the law protects him. The law is him. Sheriff Briggs is his oldest brother. Deputy Briggs, the one you met, is his youngest. The county judge plays poker with Clayton every Friday night and loses just enough to stay friendly, but not enough to seem suspicious. The territorial marshal visited once, 5 years back, asking questions about land fraud. He left town the next day and never came back. No one knows what changed his mind, but after that we all understood. Whatever happens in Redemption Springs stays in Redemption Springs. Caleb absorbed this, fitting pieces together. And Lila Harper's debt? The proprietor's face softened slightly. Thomas Harper was a good man. Too good for this place, probably. He believed people were fundamentally decent, that hard work and honesty mattered. Clayton saw him coming from a mile away. Sold him mining equipment that was worthless, investment shares in a railroad spur that was never going to be built, promissory notes on cattle that didn't exist. By the time Thomas realized he'd been swindled, he was in too deep to get out. Why didn't he fight back? Go to the territorial authorities? He tried. Spent his last $100 on a lawyer who came up from Denver. The lawyer took one look at the contracts, all legal, all signed, all witnessed by the deputy and 2 independent parties who happened to be on Clayton's payroll, and told Thomas he had no case. The debt was real, even if it was built on lies. The law doesn't care about intent, stranger, only about signatures and dollars. And now Clayton wants the daughter. Clayton always gets what he wants eventually. The proprietor finished packing the supplies and pushed the bundle across the counter. Lila's fighting him, which takes more courage than most people in this town could muster. But courage doesn't pay debts, and in 7 days when the bank forecloses, she'll have 2 choices: accept Clayton's proposal or leave with nothing. There's a third choice. Caleb picked up his supplies. Someone pays the debt. The proprietor's laugh was sharp, disbelieving. And who's going to do that? $15,000 is more money than most people in this territory will see in their entire lives. You'd need to be either crazy or rich to... He stopped, really looking at Caleb for the first time. Oh, hell, you're serious. As a grave. Then you're crazier than I thought. The proprietor leaned across the counter, his voice urgent. Listen to me. Even if you pay off the debt, it won't end. Clayton doesn't just want the land, he wants Lila. He's decided she's his, and when Clayton decides something, he doesn't let go. Paying the debt will just make him angry. And when Clayton gets angry, people get hurt. Sometimes they disappear. Sometimes they just stop being problems. I've dealt with angry men before. Not like this. Clayton has resources, connections, patience. He'll wait you out, wear you down, find your weaknesses and exploit them. And the whole time the law will be on his side because the law belongs to him. Caleb was quiet for a moment, considering. Everything the proprietor said made sense. The smart move was to walk away, to leave Lila to her fate and return to his land up north where complications couldn't find him. He'd made a good life by avoiding exactly this kind of entanglement. But then he thought about Lila's face in the alley, the fear barely contained, the defiance burning through terror like light through cracks. He thought about his mother, 30 years dead, who'd spent her life bending to men who mistook kindness for weakness. He thought about all the towns he'd ridden through where good people suffered in silence because no one had the strength or stupidity to stand up. Maybe it was time to be stupid. I appreciate the warning, he said finally, but I'm staying. The proprietor studied him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. All right, your funeral, but for what it's worth. He glanced toward the window again, then back to Caleb. For what it's worth, it's been a long time since anyone stood up to the Briggs family. Might be good for this town to remember what courage looks like, even if it gets you killed. Encouraging, Caleb gathered his supplies. Where's the stable? End of the street, south side. Ask for Jeremiah. He's old but honest, which is rare around here. And stranger? The proprietor's voice stopped him at the door. Watch your back. Deputy Briggs isn't the forgiving type, and Clayton has men who'll do his dirty work without asking questions. I'll keep that in mind. Caleb stepped back into the sunlight, supplies under one arm, and made his way toward the stable. The street had emptied somewhat, people going about their business with the careful neutrality of those who'd learned not to notice trouble. But he could feel eyes watching from windows and doorways, could sense the town holding its collective breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The stable was exactly where the proprietor had indicated, a long, low building with a faded sign reading Jeremiah's Livery and Boarding. The doors stood open, revealing dim interior and the comfortable smell of hay and horses. Caleb led his mount inside, blinking to adjust to the shadowed light. Help you? The voice came from the back of the stable, rough with age and cigarettes. Need boarding for my horse. At least one night, maybe more. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man somewhere north of 70, bent with years but still moving with the wiry strength of someone who'd worked with his hands all his life. His face was weathered leather, his eyes sharp and knowing. Jeremiah? Caleb asked. That's me. And you're the fool who crossed Deputy Briggs in the alley. It wasn't a question. Word really does travel fast. Small town, nothing else to talk about. Jeremiah took the reins, running practiced hands over the horse's flanks, checking hooves and teeth with the automatic expertise of a man who'd been doing this for decades. Good animal, well cared for. You know horses. Had to learn. Spent most of my life in the saddle. I can tell. This one trusts you, which says something about the kind of man you are. Jeremiah led the horse toward a stall, still talking. Of course, it also says you might be the kind of man who makes decisions with his heart instead of his head, which can get a fella killed in places like Redemption Springs. You related to the proprietor of the general store? You both give the same warnings. Samuel's my nephew. Good boy. Little nervous, but he's got a brain in his head. Jeremiah began removing the horse's saddle with efficient movements. And he's right to be nervous. You've poked a hornet's nest, stranger. The Briggs family doesn't take kindly to being challenged. So I've heard. Caleb leaned against a stall door, watching the old man work. Tell me something. How does the whole town end up under one family's thumb? There are 150 people here, the Briggs family. What, maybe a dozen of them total? Closer to 20 if you count the cousins and in-laws. But numbers don't matter when you control the money and the law. Jeremiah finished with the saddle and started brushing the horse down. You ever see a pack of wolves take down a buffalo? One wolf can't do it, but a pack, working together, wearing the buffalo down bit by bit, eventually even something that big and strong falls. And the buffalo never fights back? Oh, it fights, but fighting costs energy and energy runs out. Eventually the buffalo realizes it can't win, so it stops fighting, just stands there and accepts what's coming. That's Redemption Springs, stranger. We fought for about 10 years after the Briggs family showed up, lost every fight. After a while, people stopped trying. What about Sheriff Briggs? He was supposed to be the law here. Was before Clayton got to him. Byron Briggs, that's the sheriff. He came here with Clayton 30 years ago. They weren't brothers back then, or at least Clayton didn't claim him as one. But after Clayton bought the bank and started accumulating power, suddenly Byron was family. Got himself appointed sheriff, and the law started bending whichever way Clayton needed it to bend. And no one from outside ever investigated? Once. Like I said, Territorial Marshal came through 5 years back, stayed 2 days, asked a lot of questions, left in a hurry. Rumor is Clayton bought him off, but who knows? Maybe he just realized he was outmatched. Either way, we never saw him again. Caleb was quiet, processing. The picture being painted was of a town so thoroughly corrupted, so completely controlled, that resistance seemed futile, but futility had never stopped him before. This debt of Lila Harper's, he said finally. $15,000. That's a lot of money for a schoolteacher's father to accumulate. It is. And Thomas Harper didn't accumulate it through normal means. He was swindled, pure and simple. Clayton's good at that, finding decent people with dreams and selling them those dreams at prices they can't afford. The contract's legal? Unfortunately, yes. All witnessed, all signed, all technically above board. Clayton's smart enough to keep his schemes just inside the law. Makes it damn near impossible to challenge him in court. What if the debt was paid off? Jeremiah's hands stopped moving. He looked at Caleb over the horse's back, his eyes narrowed and assessing. You serious about that? I am. You got $15,000? I do. A low whistle escaped Jeremiah's lips. Well, hell, that's unexpected. He resumed brushing the horse, but his movements were slower now, thoughtful. It'd solve one problem, but create about 10 others. Such as? Such as Clayton losing face, such as the whole town seeing that he can be beaten, such as you painting a target on your back so big they could see it from Denver. Jeremiah set down the brush and faced Caleb directly. You pay that debt, you become Clayton's enemy, and Clayton's enemies tend to meet with accidents. Horses throw them, buildings collapse on them. Sometimes they just ride out of town and are never heard from again. I've survived accidents before. I'm sure you have, but there's surviving and then there's living. You willing to spend the rest of your days looking over your shoulder, wondering when Clayton's going to make his move? Caleb smiled, but there was no humor in it. I've been looking over my shoulder for 20 years, old man. At least this time, I'll know why. Jeremiah studied him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. All right. Your life, your choices. But answer me one thing. Why? You don't know Lila Harper. You don't owe this town anything. Hell, you rode in here less than 2 hours ago. So why are you willing to throw $15,000 and possibly your life into a fight that's not yours? It was the same question Lila had asked, and Caleb still didn't have a good answer. Or maybe he had too many answers, all of them partial truths that didn't quite add up to a whole. Maybe I'm tired of seeing good people lose, he said finally. Maybe I've got money I didn't earn honestly, and I'm looking for a way to balance the scales. Maybe I just don't like bullies. Take your pick. Or maybe, Jeremiah said softly, you're looking for a reason to stop running. The words hit harder than Caleb expected. He opened his mouth to deny it, but the denial stuck in his throat. Because the old man wasn't entirely wrong. For 5 years he'd been running from his past, from the man he'd been, from the things he'd done in service of people who'd used him as a weapon and discarded him when he'd outlived his usefulness. He'd bought land up north, thinking isolation would bring peace, but peace and loneliness weren't the same thing, and he'd been lonely for longer than he cared to admit. Maybe, he said quietly, or maybe I'm just a fool with more money than sense. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. Jeremiah clapped him on the shoulder. Your horse will be ready whenever you need him. Charged by the day, but for what you're about to do, first night's on me. Figure it's the least I can do for someone dumb enough to fight Clayton Briggs. Encouraging. I'm old. I've earned the right to be honest. Jeremiah headed toward the stable office, then paused. You need a place to sleep. There's a boarding house 2 streets over, run by Martha Hennessy. She's Clayton's cousin, but she's also got enough spine to rent you a room without asking his permission first. Tell her Jeremiah sent you. Appreciated. Caleb left the stable and made his way through the quiet streets toward the boarding house. The sun was starting its descent toward the western horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. In better circumstances, it might have been beautiful. But there was a weight in the air, a tension that made even the sunset feel ominous. The boarding house was a 2-story structure with peeling white paint and a porch that had seen better decades. A woman sat in a rocking chair on that porch, knitting something shapeless, and watching Caleb's approach with the expression of someone who'd already heard everything worth hearing about him. Mrs. Hennessy? He asked, stopping at the porch steps. That's me. And you're the stranger who's got the whole town buzzing like a disturbed beehive. Her voice was matter-of-fact, neither hostile nor particularly welcoming. Jeremiah send you? He did. Then I suppose you're looking for a room. She set down her knitting and stood, revealing a woman perhaps 60 years old, built solid and strong, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. I've got one available. $2 a night, includes breakfast. No drinking, no gambling, no entertaining women. You break those rules, you're out. Understood? Understood. Good. She led him inside, up a narrow staircase, and down a hallway to a small but clean room with a bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. Breakfast is at 6. You miss it, you don't eat. Bathroom's down the hall. Any questions? Just one. You're Clayton's cousin? Martha's expression didn't change. I am. And before you ask, no, I don't report to him about my guests. This is my house, my business. Clayton may own half the town, but he doesn't own me. She paused at the door. That being said, I'm also not stupid enough to actively work against him. So if you're expecting an ally, look elsewhere. I'll give you a fair room at a fair price, and I won't repeat your conversations, but that's all you're getting from me. Fair enough? One more thing. Martha's voice stopped him as he moved toward the window. I heard what you did for Lila Harper, heard what you're planning to do tomorrow. Most people in this town will think you're crazy. Some will think you're noble. A few will think you're dangerous. She met his eyes. I think you're all three, and I think you have no idea what you're walking into. You might be right. I usually am. She turned to leave, then paused again. For what it's worth, and it's probably not worth much, I hope you succeed. This town's been under Clayton's boot for too long. It'd be nice to see someone knock him down a peg, even if it costs you everything. Also encouraging, Martha's smile was thin. I'm 63 years old, Mr. Ward. I'm done lying to make people feel better. Sleep well. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. She closed the door behind her, leaving Caleb alone in the small room as evening settled over Redemption Springs like a shroud. He moved to the window and looked out at the street below, empty now, everyone retreated behind closed doors, the town holding its breath and waiting for whatever storm was coming. Caleb had been in storms before, had stood at their center and emerged alive, if not entirely whole. But there was something different about this one. This time, he wasn't fighting for money or revenge or survival. This time, he was fighting for something more nebulous and infinitely more dangerous. He was fighting for the idea that good people deserved better than to be crushed by bad ones. That courage mattered, that standing up, even when the odds were impossible, was worth the cost. It was a foolish idea, a romantic idea, the kind of idea that got men killed in forgotten towns where no one would remember their names. But as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to emerge overhead, Caleb found he didn't care. For the first time in 5 years, he had a purpose beyond simple survival. And if that purpose ended up being his last, well, at least he'd go down swinging. Tomorrow he would walk into Briggs Bank and change the game. Tomorrow he would find out what happened when you challenged a tyrant on his own ground. Tomorrow, the town of Redemption Springs would learn that not everyone could be intimidated, bought, or broken. Tomorrow. But tonight, Caleb Ward stood at the window of a boarding house in a dying frontier town and allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Dawn came to Redemption Springs the way it always did. Reluctant, grudging, as if even the sun hesitated to shine on a place so thoroughly corrupted. Caleb woke before first light, a habit ingrained from years of sleeping in places where being slow meant being dead. He dressed in the gray pre-dawn silence, checked his weapons with the automatic precision of ritual, and descended the stairs to find Martha Hennessy already in the kitchen, coffee brewing and biscuits in the oven. "Sleep well?" she asked without turning from the stove. "Well enough?" "Liar." She poured coffee into a thick ceramic mug and set it on the table. "I've been running this boarding house for 30 years. I can tell when someone spent the night staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the ways tomorrow could go wrong." Caleb took the coffee and didn't argue. The truth was, he'd slept maybe 3 hours, and those had been interrupted by dreams of his mother's face and the sound of Lila Harper's voice saying, "I won't marry Clayton Briggs. Not for land, not for money, not for anything." "The bank opens at 8, Martha said, setting a plate of biscuits beside the coffee. "Clayton usually arrives around 9, after breakfast at the hotel. If you want to deal with the bank manager first, get there early. If you want to deal with Clayton directly, wait. Which would you recommend?" "Depends on what you're trying to accomplish." Martha finally turned to face him, wiping flour from her hands on her apron. Bank manager is a weasel named Silas Pemberton. He'll follow whatever instructions Clayton left him, but he's also a coward. You intimidate him enough, he might process the payment without asking too many questions. Clayton, on the other hand, he'll want to know who you are, where you got the money, what your angle is. He'll try to talk you out of it, threaten you, maybe even offer to buy you off. But once he realizes you're serious, that's when things get dangerous. Dangerous how? Clayton doesn't lose, Mr. Ward. Not publicly. Not in his own town. If you embarrass him by paying off Lila's debt in front of witnesses, he'll have to respond. And his responses tend to be permanent. Caleb drank his coffee, considering. The smart play was to handle it quietly, pay Pemberton, get a receipt, leave before Clayton even knew what happened. But that would also mean Lila would still be vulnerable, still be living in fear of what Clayton might do next. No, if this was going to work, it needed to be public. It needed to be a statement. "I'll wait for Clayton," he said. Martha nodded slowly, unsurprised. "Then you'd better eat those biscuits. You're going to need your strength." The eastern sky was just beginning to blush pink when Caleb left the boarding house and made his way toward the bank. The streets were mostly empty, though a few early risers moved through the shadows. A shopkeeper sweeping his porch, a woman drawing water from the town pump, a dog nosing through garbage in the alley. They all stopped to watch him pass, their faces carefully neutral, but he could feel the weight of their attention like a physical thing. News had spread, clearly. The whole town knew what he was planning. The bank was an imposing structure of red brick and white trim, 2 stories tall with barred windows and a heavy oak door that spoke of permanence and power. A brass plaque beside the entrance read, "Briggs Family Bank, established 1856, Clayton Briggs, proprietor." Caleb studied it for a moment, then tried the door. Locked. He settled onto a bench across the street, tilted his hat against the rising sun, and waited. The town came slowly to life around him. Shops opened, wagons rumbled past. Children ran toward the schoolhouse, where Lila would soon be teaching mathematics and reading to students whose parents couldn't imagine a better future for them. The normalcy of it all felt surreal, like watching a play where everyone knew their lines but had forgotten why they were performing. At 7:30, a thin man in a gray suit hurried down the street, keys jangling in his hand. He stopped when he saw Caleb on the bench, his face going pale. "You're him," the man said, his voice squeaking slightly. "The one who... You're the stranger. And you're Silas Pemberton." Caleb stood, his movements unhurried. "Bank manager." Yes, but the bank isn't open yet. You'll have to come back." "I'll wait inside." Caleb's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Pemberton's hands shook as he unlocked the door. Inside, the bank was all dark wood and brass fixtures, with a massive safe visible through an iron gate at the rear. Ledgers lined the shelves behind the counter, and a portrait of Clayton Briggs hung on the wall, his painted eyes seeming to follow their movement through the room. What do you need?" Pemberton had moved behind the counter as if it could protect him. "I'm here about the Harper account. The debt Thomas Harper left his daughter." "Oh." Pemberton's face went from pale to sheet white. "That account. I'm afraid I can't discuss customer accounts without proper authorization, and..." Caleb pulled a thick leather wallet from his coat and set it on the counter with a heavy thud. $15,000. I'm here to pay it in full." Pemberton stared at the wallet as if it might contain a snake. This is highly irregular. I'll need to consult with Mr. Briggs before I can accept. The debt is legal, the payment is legal, unless there's some reason you can't accept legal payment of a legal debt." "No, but procedure requires, Mr. Briggs always handles significant transactions personally, and then I suppose we'll wait for him together." Caleb retrieved the wallet and moved to a leather chair positioned against the wall. "When does he usually arrive?" 9 o'clock. But you can't just... You should leave. Come back later. Make an appointment. I'm comfortable here." Pemberton looked like he might cry. His hands fluttered over the ledgers, straightening papers that didn't need straightening, adjusting his spectacles every few seconds. Finally, he retreated to a back office, and Caleb heard the muffled sound of urgent conversation, Pemberton's voice high and panicked, and a woman's voice responding with sharp irritation. 10 minutes later, Deputy Briggs burst through the front door, his hand on his gun. "You," he pointed at Caleb. "Outside, now." Caleb didn't move. "I'm a customer conducting business during business hours. Unless you're planning to arrest me for banking, I suggest you remove your hand from that weapon before you do something you'll regret." "You got a lot of nerve coming here after yesterday. You think you can just—" "I think I can pay a debt. That's all." Caleb's voice remained calm, but his eyes had gone flat and dangerous. "Now, you can either leave and let me conduct my business, or you can draw that gun and see how fast you really are. Your choice." The deputy's face flushed purple, and for a moment Caleb thought the man might actually be stupid enough to draw. Then a voice from the doorway cut through the tension like a knife through butter. "That's enough, Marcus." The man who entered was perhaps 65, tall and lean, with silver hair combed back from a high forehead and eyes the color of creek ice. He wore an expensive suit, perfectly tailored, and moved with the confident grace of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room he entered. His face was handsome in a weathered way, though there was something reptilian about his smile, all teeth and no warmth. Clayton Briggs had arrived. "Mr. Ward, I presume." Clayton extended his hand as if they were old friends meeting for lunch. "I've heard quite a bit about you since yesterday afternoon. You've caused quite a stir in our quiet little town." Caleb stood but didn't take the offered hand. "Mr. Briggs." Clayton's smile didn't waver as he lowered his rejected hand. "Marcus, wait outside. Mr. Pemberton, bring me the Harper file." He gestured to a chair across from Caleb. "Please, sit. Let's talk like civilized men." "I'm not here to talk. I'm here to pay a debt." "So I've been told, $15,000, correct? That's a substantial sum. You must have been very successful in your— What is it you do exactly?" "I ranch up north." "A rancher with $15,000 in cash." Clayton's eyebrows rose. "That's unusual. Most ranchers I know are lucky to clear a few $100s profit in a good year. You must have one hell of an operation." "I do all right." Clearly, Pemberton had returned with a thick folder which Clayton opened and began examining with the casual interest of someone reviewing a dinner menu. The Harper debt. Yes, poor Thomas. Such a tragedy. A good man, but too trusting. Too willing to believe in opportunities that seemed too good to be true. Which, of course, they were. "You swindled him." The blunt accusation hung in the air. Pemberton made a strangled sound, but Clayton merely smiled wider. "I did no such thing. Every transaction is documented here. Equipment purchases, investment shares, promissory notes. All properly signed, witnessed, and legally binding. Thomas Harper made poor business decisions. That's unfortunate, but it's not fraud." "You sold him mining equipment that was worthless." "I sold him equipment at fair market prices. If it turned out to be incompatible with his needs, that's hardly my fault. Buyer beware, Mr. Ward. It's one of the fundamental principles of commerce." "And the railroad shares?" "A legitimate investment opportunity that unfortunately didn't materialize. These things happen in business. Surely as a successful rancher you understand that not every venture succeeds?" Caleb studied the man across from him, recognizing the type immediately. He'd worked for men like Clayton Briggs, smooth, intelligent, utterly without conscience, men who could justify any cruelty, rationalize any exploitation, because in their minds the world was divided into predators and prey, and they'd simply chosen the winning side. "I'm here to pay the debt," he repeated. "The full $15,000, today, now." Clayton closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "And why would you do that, Mr. Ward? You claim not to know Miss Harper. You have no connection to this town. What possible interest could you have in resolving her father's debts?" "Does it matter?" "It matters to me. I like to understand people's motivations. It helps me predict their behavior." Clayton's eyes were sharp, calculating. "Are you hoping to win Miss Harper's affections? Court her yourself, perhaps? Because I should warn you, she comes with certain complications beyond this debt. Property that needs managing, a school that barely covers its own costs, family obligations. I'm paying the debt. Accept the money or don't, but stop wasting my time with speculation." Something flickered in Clayton's eyes. Anger, maybe, or grudging respect. "You're direct. I appreciate that." Most people dance around things, try to negotiate, make deals. You just put your cards on the table. He drummed his fingers on the desk, thinking. All right, hypothetically, let's say I accept your payment. The debt is cleared, Miss Harper keeps her property, everyone goes their separate ways. What then? Then the debt is paid and Miss Harper is free. Free. Clayton tasted the word like it was sour. From one obligation, perhaps, but freedom is relative, Mr. Ward. She'll still be alone, still be struggling to maintain property she can barely afford, still be vulnerable to any number of misfortunes that could befall a woman without proper protection. She'll manage. Will she? Clayton leaned forward, his voice dropping to something almost confidential. Let me tell you something about Redemption Springs. This is a hard place, unforgiving. People who try to stand alone here tend to falter. They need connections, support, family. My brother's proposal wasn't just about the land, you understand. It was about offering Miss Harper security, a future, children, perhaps, things she'll never have trying to run that property by herself. Your brother is 63 years old and has buried 3 wives. Forgive me if I don't see that as a compelling marriage proposal. Clayton's smile turned to ice. Those women died of natural causes. Fever, childbirth complications, a riding accident. Tragedies, certainly, but hardly uncommon on the frontier, and my brother is a wealthy, respected man who could give Miss Harper everything she needs. Except the freedom to choose. Choice is a luxury, Mr. Ward. Most people can't afford it. Clayton stood, moving to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. You're new here, so you don't understand how things work. This town has an order, a balance. Everyone has their place. When people step out of that place, accept help from strangers with unclear motives, it disrupts the balance. And disruptions can be, problematic. Is that a threat? It's an observation. Clayton turned back and his face was pleasant again, all traces of hardness smoothed away. But since we're being direct, yes, Mr. Ward, it's also a warning. You pay this debt, you become part of a situation you don't fully understand. You make enemies. You put yourself in a position where accidents might happen, where your ranch up north might face difficulties, lost cattle, damaged property, labor disputes, where you might find yourself unwelcome in towns across the territory. I've been unwelcome before. I'm sure you have, but I have resources, connections, patience. I can make life very difficult for people who cross me. And I hold grudges, Mr. Ward, for a very long time. Caleb stood, matching Clayton's posture. They were nearly the same height, these two men, though decades and philosophy separated them like a canyon. Here's what I understand. You're a bully who's been running this town through fear and manipulation for 30 years. You've gotten so used to winning that you can't imagine losing. But today, you're going to lose. I'm paying Lila Harper's debt. You're going to accept the money. And then you're going to watch as everything you planned falls apart. And if I refuse to accept the payment, then I'll go to the territorial court and make you accept it. And while I'm there, I'll request a full audit of your banking practices, your loan terms, your foreclosure procedures. I'll bring lawyers, accountants, federal investigators. I'll turn over every rock until we find all the rot underneath. How does that sound? Clayton's face had gone still, carved from stone. When he spoke, his voice was soft, deadly. You're making a mistake. Probably. But it's my mistake to make. Caleb pulled out the wallet again and began counting bills onto Pemberton's desk. $15,000. Count it. Give me a receipt. Mark the Harper account paid in full. Mr. Briggs? Pemberton's voice was barely a whisper. What should I do as he says? Clayton's words came out clipped, precise. Take the money. Process the payment. Give him his receipt. He moved toward the door, then paused. But understand something, Mr. Ward. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. You just bought yourself a war you can't win. I've won wars before. Clayton's laugh was bitter. Not against me, you haven't. He left, the door closing behind him with ominous finality. Pemberton's hands shook as he counted the money, recounted it, checked it against the ledger. Finally, he pulled out a receipt book and began writing with a quill that left ink blots on the paper like drops of blood. Paid in full, he muttered, signing his name with a flourish. The Harper account is settled. Miss Harper's property is free and clear of all debts owed to Briggs Bank. He pushed the receipt across the desk. You're insane. You know that, right? Completely insane. So I've been told. Caleb took the receipt, folded it carefully, and tucked it into his coat pocket. One more thing. I want a copy of the original loan documents. Every contract Thomas Harper signed. Those are confidential bank records. I can't just... You can and you will. Because if you don't, I'll assume you're hiding something, and I'll make it my personal mission to find out what. Are we clear? Pemberton swallowed hard, nodded, and retreated to his office. He returned 10 minutes later with a stack of papers, all bearing Thomas Harper's signature and Clayton Briggs's elegant script. Caleb leafed through them, his jaw tightening with each page. The contracts were masterpieces of legal manipulation, technically valid but morally bankrupt, structured to trap Harper in debt while giving Clayton every advantage. Thank you for your cooperation, Caleb said, his voice heavy with irony. He tucked the documents under his arm and headed for the door. Mr. Ward, Pemberton called after him. What you did, paying that debt, it was kind, stupid, but kind. I hope you survive what comes next. Me too. The morning sun was climbing higher when Caleb stepped back onto the street. A small crowd had gathered, townspeople who'd heard the commotion, drawn by curiosity and the town's insatiable appetite for drama. They parted as he walked through them, their faces a mix of awe, fear, and calculation. Caleb ignored them all and made his way to the schoolhouse. Lila was at the front of the classroom, writing multiplication tables on a chalkboard, while 20 children of various ages watched with varying degrees of attention. She turned when the door opened, and her face went through a rapid series of emotions: surprise, hope, fear, and finally something that looked like fragile joy. Children, she said, her voice remarkably steady, continue your work. I'll be right back. She met Caleb on the porch, closing the door behind her. You went to the bank. I did. He handed her the receipt. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it, reading the words once, twice, 3 times, as if they might disappear if she looked away. Paid in full, she whispered. The debt is... You actually... Her voice broke and tears spilled down her cheeks. I didn't think you'd really do it. Part of me thought it was a dream, that I'd wake up and you'd be gone and everything would still be... She pressed the receipt against her chest. Thank you. I don't know how to repay you. I don't know if I can ever... You don't owe me anything. Caleb cut her off gently. The debt is paid. The land is yours. Clayton can't force you into anything now. But he'll try something else. Lila wiped her eyes. You don't know him like I do. He doesn't give up. He'll find another way to... Let him try. I'm not going anywhere. She looked up at him, really seeing him perhaps for the first time. Why are you doing this? And don't say it doesn't matter, because it does. To me, it matters. Caleb was quiet for a moment, searching for words that could explain impulses he didn't fully understand himself. I told you yesterday, I'm tired of watching good people lose, but there's more to it than that. He looked out at the street, at the town that seemed to hold its breath. I spent 15 years as a hired gun. Worked for ranchers, railroad companies, mining operations, anyone who needed someone good with a gun and light on conscience. I was very good at it, made a lot of money, and every night I'd lie awake knowing I'd become exactly the kind of man I swore I'd never be. What changed? I killed the wrong person. The words came out flat, matter of fact. Or maybe the right person, depending on how you look at it. Either way, I realized I couldn't keep living that life. So I took my money, bought land, and tried to disappear. Thought maybe if I was alone long enough, I could forget what I'd been. He met her eyes. But you can't forget. The past doesn't disappear just because you hide from it. So maybe this, paying your debt, standing up to Clayton, maybe it's my way of trying to balance the scales. To be someone better than the man I was. Lila reached out and took his hand, her touch light but deliberate. The man you were doesn't matter as much as the man you're choosing to be now. Philosophical of you. I teach philosophy to 8th graders. It's part of the curriculum. Her smile was small but genuine. Caleb, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. What happens next? Clayton isn't going to just accept this, and you can't stay here forever. You have your own land, your own life up north. So what happens when you leave? It was the question he'd been avoiding since yesterday, the one that had kept him staring at the ceiling most of the night. Because she was right. He couldn't stay in Redemption Springs indefinitely. His land needed tending, his cattle needed managing. But leaving Lila alone to face Clayton's inevitable retaliation felt like abandonment. I don't know, he admitted. I haven't thought that far ahead. Then maybe you should start thinking about it. Because Clayton is thinking about it. He's probably already planning his next move. She squeezed his hand. I'm grateful for what you've done. More grateful than I can express. But I also don't want you dying for me, Caleb. This is my fight. It always has been. Not anymore. The words came out with more conviction than he'd intended. The minute I stepped into that alley yesterday, it became my fight too, and I don't walk away from fights. Even fights you can't win? Especially those. They're the only ones worth having. A bell rang inside the schoolhouse, and children's voices rose in a chaotic chorus. Lila smiled apologetically. I have to get back, but Caleb, be careful, please. Clayton's dangerous in ways that aren't always obvious. He doesn't just use force, he uses the law, public opinion, social pressure. He'll try to turn the town against you, make you seem like the villain instead of him. Let him try. She hesitated at the door, then turned back. Come for dinner tonight. My house, 6 o'clock. It's the least I can do after what you've done for me. And besides, her expression turned mischievous. If the whole town's going to be gossiping about us anyway, we might as well give them something real to gossip about. Before Caleb could respond, she slipped back inside, leaving him standing on the porch with the distinct impression that he'd just been outmaneuvered by someone far more clever than she'd initially appeared. The rest of the day passed with the strange slowness of waiting for a storm you know is coming but can't see yet. Caleb returned to the boarding house, checked his weapons, and tried to read a newspaper that was 3 weeks old and full of news from places that felt like different planets. Martha brought him lunch without comment, though her eyes said everything her mouth didn't. Around 4 o'clock, there was a knock at his door. Come in. Jeremiah entered, hat in hand, looking older and more tired than he had yesterday. We need to talk. About? About the fact that Clayton Briggs just held a town meeting. About the fact that he's spreading word you're a confidence man, a criminal, probably wanted in 3 territories. About the fact that he's offered a $500 reward to anyone who can provide information about your past. Jeremiah sank into the room's only chair. He's going to destroy your reputation, make it impossible for you to stay here or anywhere else. And the hell of it is, people will believe him. Because that's what Clayton does. He controls the narrative. Let him talk. It's not just talk. He's already got people questioning your motives, wondering what you really want from Lila, speculating about where you got that money. By tomorrow, half the town will be convinced you're some kind of outlaw using Lila as cover for whatever criminal enterprise you're running. And the other half will be too scared to defend you, even if they wanted to. Jeremiah's expression was grim. This is how Clayton wins, son. Not with guns, though he'll use those if he has to, but with words, reputation, social pressure. He makes his enemies into pariahs, and then the town does his dirty work for him. Caleb considered this, unsurprised. It was a tactic he'd seen before, in other towns, other conflicts. Destroy someone's credibility first, then destroy them physically. It was effective because it was subtle, legal, and almost impossible to fight against. What would you do? He asked Jeremiah. In my position? The old man was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, I'd leave. Cut my losses, ride north to that land you've got, and never look back. You paid Lila's debt. That's already more than anyone else in this town would have done. You don't owe her your life. And if I stay? Then you better be ready for war, real war. Not the kind where armies line up and shoot at each other, but the kind where every day is a battle, every conversation is a trap, and you never know who's really on your side. It'll wear you down, make you paranoid, turn you into someone you don't recognize. Is that really what you want? Caleb stood and moved to the window, watching the street below. I spent 15 years becoming someone I hated, someone who hurt people for money and called it justice. When I finally stopped, I thought isolation would fix me. That if I just stayed away from people, avoided complications, kept to myself, I could somehow become clean again. He turned to face Jeremiah. But it doesn't work that way. You can't hide from what you are. You can only choose what you're going to be next. And what do you choose to be? Someone who doesn't run. Someone who sees injustice and stands against it, even if standing costs everything. Someone who protects people who can't protect themselves. But he smiled without humor. Probably someone who gets killed in a forgotten frontier town and buried in an unmarked grave. But at least I'll die being the man I should have been all along. Jeremiah stood slowly, studying Caleb's face. You remind me of someone I knew once. Young hothead, full of ideals, convinced he could change the world. He stood up to a corrupt sheriff, organized the townspeople, made all kinds of noise about justice and right. The old man's voice grew distant. They found him in the river 3 weeks later. Officially, it was ruled an accident. Unofficially, everyone knew the sheriff had him killed. And the town? The town went right back to being afraid because that's what towns do. They survive. What was his name? Caleb asked quietly. Thomas Harper, Lila's father. The words landed like a punch. Caleb stared at Jeremiah, pieces clicking into place. He fought back. He tried. For about 10 years, he tried everything: legal challenges, appeals to territorial authorities, organizing resistance. Nothing worked. Eventually, he realized he couldn't win, so he tried to work within the system. Borrowed money from Clayton's bank to improve his position, thinking maybe if he became successful enough, he could protect his daughter from what he knew was coming. Jeremiah's expression was infinitely sad. All he did was give Clayton another weapon to use against his family. And the debt was Clayton's revenge. Thomas embarrassed him, made him look weak in front of the whole town. Clayton doesn't forget things like that. So he swindled Thomas, buried him in debt, and waited for him to die so he could collect on the daughter. It's been Clayton's plan for 5 years. Caleb felt fury building in his chest, cold and controlled. And you're telling me this now because you need to understand what you're up against. Thomas Harper was a good man, Caleb, a brave man. And Clayton destroyed him slowly, methodically, legally. If you stay, the same thing will happen to you. Maybe slower, maybe faster, but the ending will be the same. Unless I'm faster. Caleb's voice had gone quiet, dangerous. Unless I don't play by Clayton's rules. That's a dark road, son. Once you step outside the law, you become what he's accused you of being. You prove him right. Maybe. Or maybe sometimes the law is just another weapon the powerful use against the weak, and the only way to win is to break it. Jeremiah moved toward the door, then paused. Dinner at Lila's tonight? How did you Small town. Everyone knows everything. The old man's smile was sad. Be careful, Caleb. Not just of Clayton, but of yourself. It's easy to become the monster you're fighting. Easier than you think. After Jeremiah left, Caleb sat in the growing darkness and thought about monsters. About men who started with good intentions and ended as tyrants. About the distance between justice and vengeance, and how thin that line really was. He thought about his mother, dead 30 years, who taught him that strength without compassion was just cruelty by another name. He thought about the men he'd killed, some who deserved it, and some who were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. He thought about Thomas Harper drowning in the river while a town watched and did nothing. And he thought about Lila, standing in that alley with her back against the wall, refusing to surrender even when surrender was the only rational choice. At 6 o'clock, he walked to her house. It was a small cottage at the edge of town, painted white with blue shutters, and a garden that showed signs of careful tending despite obvious neglect. Lila answered the door wearing a simple dress, her hair down around her shoulders, and for a moment she looked nothing like the desperate schoolteacher from yesterday. She looked young, hopeful, almost happy. You came, she said, smiling. You invited me. I did. But after everything that's happened today, I half expected you to be halfway to Denver by now. She stepped aside, gesturing him in. Come in. Dinner's almost ready. The interior was modest but clean, filled with books and small touches that suggested a person who cared about beauty even when beauty was expensive. A fire crackled in the hearth, and something that smelled amazing was cooking in the kitchen. You didn't have to go to this trouble, Caleb said. Yes, I did. You paid $15,000 to save my life. The least I can do is cook you a decent meal. She moved to the kitchen, checking pots and adjusting temperatures. Besides, I wanted to. It's been a long time since I had a reason to cook for someone other than myself. They ate at a small table near the fire, roast chicken, potatoes, vegetables from her garden. The food was good, simple, and honest, and they ate mostly in silence, comfortable rather than awkward. When they'd finished, Lila poured coffee and they moved to chairs by the hearth. I heard about Clayton's town meeting, she said quietly. About what he's saying about you. I expected something like that. It's working. People are already starting to avoid me, won't meet my eyes at the general store. By tomorrow, I'll be as much of a pariah as you are. She sipped her coffee. I'm sorry. This is my fault. It's Clayton's fault, not yours. Still, if I'd just accepted his proposal, if I'd been willing to— Don't! Caleb's voice was sharp. Don't apologize for refusing to be a victim. That's what men like Clayton want. For you to blame yourself, to think you somehow deserved what was happening to you. I know, you're right. It's just— She set down her coffee cup. It's hard standing alone against the whole town, knowing everyone's watching, judging, waiting to see if you'll break. You're not standing alone anymore. She met his eyes, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. What happens now, Caleb? Really? Clayton won't stop. The town won't suddenly grow a spine and stand up to him. And you can't stay here forever. So what's the end game? It was the same question she'd asked that morning, and he still didn't have a good answer. But sitting here in the firelight, watching this woman who'd chosen courage over comfort, he found himself speaking thoughts he hadn't fully formed until the words left his mouth. What if I did stay? Not forever, maybe, but long enough to make sure Clayton can't hurt you. Long enough to help you get established, stable, safe. That could take years. I've got years. What about your land up north? I can hire someone to manage it, or sell it. Land's just dirt and grass. It's not— He trailed off, searching for words. It's not worth more than doing the right thing. Lila was quiet for a long moment, her face unreadable. You'd give up your life, your plans, everything you've built, to protect someone you barely know? I'd be gaining something more important than land. What? A reason to matter. The words hung between them, honest and raw. Lila's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and when she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. You matter already, Caleb. You mattered the moment you stepped into that alley. You mattered when you walked into that bank this morning. You don't have to prove anything to me or anyone else. Maybe I'm trying to prove it to myself. She stood and moved to the fire, stirring it with a poker, sending sparks spiraling up the chimney. My father spent 10 years fighting Clayton, 10 years of his life consumed by resistance, by rage, by the endless battle against corruption. It killed him, Caleb. Maybe not directly, but it wore him down until there was nothing left. I don't want that for you. I don't want you to sacrifice yourself for a fight that might not be winnable. Every fight is winnable if you're willing to pay the price. And what's the price here? Your life? Your soul? How much are you willing to lose? Caleb stood and joined her at the fire, standing close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her presence. I lost my soul a long time ago. Maybe this is how I get it back. She turned to face him, and there were tears on her cheeks now, catching the firelight like diamonds. Or maybe this is how you lose what's left of yourself trying to save someone who can't be saved. You can be saved. This town can be saved. It just takes someone willing to stand. And if standing gets you killed, then I die knowing I stood for something that mattered. Lila reached up and touched his face, her hand gentle against his scarred cheek. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the most foolish. I can't decide which. Maybe both. She laughed through her tears, and the sound was beautiful and heartbreaking. Stay for dinner again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Stay until Clayton makes his move, until we see what he's really planning, and then— She took a shaky breath. Then we'll decide together what comes next. Not you alone trying to save me, not me alone trying to survive. Together. Together, Caleb echoed, and the word felt like a promise. They stood there in the firelight, Two people who'd found each other in the unlikeliest of circumstances. And for the first time since riding into Redemption Springs, Caleb felt something shift inside him. The isolation he'd wrapped himself in, the walls he'd built to keep the world at bay, they were crumbling, and he found he didn't mind. Maybe this was what he'd been looking for all along. Not land or peace or isolation, but purpose, connection, someone worth fighting for. Outside, the town of Redemption Springs settled into uneasy darkness, and somewhere Clayton Briggs was plotting his next move. But inside this small cottage, beside this fire, Caleb Ward allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this story could end differently than all the others. That maybe this time, the good people could win. The next 3 days passed like a slow-burning fuse, each hour bringing Clayton's inevitable response closer. Caleb fell into a rhythm that felt both foreign and strangely natural. Mornings at the stable, helping Jeremiah with repairs he didn't need help with. Afternoons reading in the boarding house or walking the perimeter of town. Evenings at Lila's cottage where they shared meals and conversation that grew easier with each passing night. The town watched them with the fascination of spectators at a hanging, waiting to see which way the rope would swing. On the fourth morning, Caleb woke to find a note slipped under his door. The handwriting was crude, the message simple. Leave town or join Thomas Harper in the river. No signature, but the threat was clear enough. He showed it to Martha over breakfast. Fourth one this week, she said, not looking up from her coffee. Found 2 nailed to your door, 1 tucked in the stable. Clayton's getting creative. You've been collecting them? Someone has to. Might need evidence eventually. She finally met his eyes. They're escalating. Started with warnings. Now they're making direct threats. Won't be long before threats become action. Let them come. That's what Thomas Harper said. Martha's voice was flat. Right up until the day they found him floating face down in the river with a belly full of water and a head full of whiskey he never drank. Caleb set down his fork, appetite gone. You think Clayton had him killed? I think Thomas Harper was a strong swimmer who never touched alcohol, and I think his death was ruled accidental by a sheriff who happens to be Clayton's brother. Draw your own conclusions. Why didn't anyone investigate? Why didn't Lila? Lila was 19 years old and drowning in grief. She tried to get the territorial marshal involved, but by the time he arrived, all the evidence had been cleaned up. All the witnesses had conveniently forgotten what they saw, and the official story was so airtight a lawyer couldn't crack it with dynamite. Martha poured more coffee, her movements mechanical. That's how Clayton works. He doesn't just kill people, he erases them, makes it look natural, legal, inevitable. And the town goes along with it because the alternative is admitting we're all complicit in murder. Caleb studied the old woman's face, seeing the weight of years and compromises etched into every line. You blame yourself. We all blame ourselves. Every person in this town who saw what was happening and did nothing. Every shopkeeper who extended Clayton credit while denying it to Thomas. Every neighbor who turned away when Lila needed help. We're all guilty, Mr. Ward. The only difference is some of us are honest enough to admit it. She stood and began clearing dishes, her back rigid with suppressed emotion. Clayton's planning something. You can feel it in the air, the way his men have been moving around town, the meetings at the bank after hours, the way Deputy Briggs keeps watching Lila's house. Whatever's coming, it's coming soon. And when it does, she paused at the kitchen door. When it does, I hope you're as fast as you think you are. Caleb spent the rest of the morning at the stable, helping Jeremiah shoe horses and repair tack while keeping one eye on the street. Around noon, a rider came through town, a young man in trail dust heading straight for the bank. He emerged 20 minutes later and rode out the way he'd come, moving fast. Messenger, Jeremiah observed, watching the dust cloud recede. Clayton's been sending and receiving a lot of those lately, bringing in people, sharing information, building something. Any idea what? Nothing good. The old man set down his hammer. I've been asking around, careful-like. Word is Clayton's hired some men from Denver, professional types, the kind who solve problems that can't be solved legally. Hired guns. Worse, hired guns at least have a code, twisted as it might be. These are the kind of men who'd shoot a woman in the back and call it justice if the price was right. Jeremiah's expression was grim. You carrying? Caleb patted his coat, feeling the reassuring weight of the colt beneath. Always. Good. Don't go anywhere without it. And Caleb, the old man's voice dropped. If they come for you, they'll come for Lila too. Maybe not at the same time, maybe not in the same way, but Clayton knows the fastest way to hurt you is through her. You need to be ready for that. I am. Are you? Jeremiah's eyes were sharp. Because being ready to defend yourself is different than being ready to defend someone else. Different calculations, different risks. You hesitate for even a second worrying about her safety, you're dead. And then she's alone again, facing Clayton without even the protection your presence provides. The words settled heavy in Caleb's chest because they were true. He'd been in gunfights before, faced death more times than he could count, but always alone, always with only his own life on the line. This was different. This was fighting with something to lose. I'll figure it out, he said finally. You'd better, because they're not going to give you a second chance to get it right. That evening, Caleb arrived at Lila's cottage to find her pacing the small parlor, a letter clutched in her hand. Her face was pale, her eyes bright with barely contained fury. What happened? He asked. She thrust the letter at him. This happened. The letter was from the Territorial Board of Education, informing Miss Lila Harper that her teaching certification was under review following allegations of moral misconduct and inappropriate behavior with a known criminal element. A formal hearing would be held in 3 weeks to determine whether she was fit to continue teaching the children of Redemption Springs. Clayton, Caleb said, the name tasting like poison. Of course it's Clayton. Who else would have the connections to reach the Territorial Board? Who else would be petty enough to attack my livelihood just because I refused to marry his brother? She snatched the letter back, crumpling it in her fist. He's going to take everything from me. The debt was just the beginning. Now he'll destroy my reputation, strip away my teaching certificate, make sure I can't earn a living anywhere in the territory. And it's all legal, all proper, all done through official channels where I have no recourse. Caleb wanted to argue, to tell her they'd fight this, but the words stuck in his throat because he knew she was right. Clayton was doing exactly what he'd promised, making them pariahs, destroying them slowly through legal means that couldn't be fought with bullets or threats. We'll hire a lawyer, he said. Fight the allegations. You've done nothing wrong. It doesn't matter what I've done. It matters what people believe I've done. And Clayton controls what people believe. She threw the crumpled letter into the fire and watched it burn. I should have left when I had the chance, should have taken what I could carry and started over somewhere else. At least then I'd still have my dignity. You still have your dignity. Clayton can't take that unless you let him. Can't he? She turned to face him, and her eyes were wet with tears she refused to let fall. Every day people cross the street to avoid me. My students' parents are pulling them from school, claiming they don't want their children exposed to corrupting influences. The general store charges me double what they charge everyone else. The church won't let me attend services. I'm being erased, Caleb. Slowly, methodically, publicly. And the worst part is, everyone's acting like it's my fault. Like I brought this on myself by refusing to know my place. Caleb crossed the room and took her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. Listen to me. Clayton's doing this because he's desperate, because you beat him. You and me together, we took away his leverage, and now he's scrambling to get it back any way he can. That means he's weak, not strong. And weak men make mistakes. What kind of mistakes? The kind that expose them. The kind that show everyone who they really are. He released her shoulders and moved to the window, looking out at the darkening street. He's been hiring men from Denver, professionals. That means he's planning something he can't do himself, something that requires skills his local thugs don't have. How do you know this? Jeremiah's been watching. So have I. And I've seen this pattern before. Powerful men who run out of legal options start looking for illegal ones. They just try to make sure the illegal stuff looks accidental. Lila was quiet for a moment, processing. You think he's going to try to kill you? Kill us. Both of us, probably. Make it look like an accident, a tragedy, something the town can mourn without asking too many questions. Caleb turned back to face her. The question is when and how. And whether we're going to wait for him to make his move or force his hand first. What do you mean, force his hand? I mean, we stop playing defense and start playing offense. We stop reacting to what Clayton does and start making him react to us. We find his weaknesses, exploit them, make him desperate enough to make mistakes big enough that even this town can't ignore them. That's dangerous. Everything about this situation is dangerous. At least this way, we control the timing. Lila moved to the chair by the fire and sank into it, suddenly looking exhausted. I don't know if I have the strength for this. For fighting, for constantly being on guard, for turning my life into a war zone. Part of me just wants to surrender, to give Clayton what he wants so the pain will stop. And the other part? The other part wants to burn his entire empire to the ground and dance in the ashes. She laughed, but it was a broken sound. I don't know which part is stronger. Caleb knelt beside her chair, taking her hand. The part that wants to fight. That part is stronger. I've seen it in you since the moment we met. You stood up to Deputy Briggs in that alley when you had every reason to cave. You've held on to this school when selling it would have been easier. You're still here, still teaching, still refusing to bow. That's not weakness, Lila. That's courage. She squeezed his hand, and when she spoke, her voice was steadier. What do we do? We gather information. We find out exactly what Clayton's planning and who he's hired to do it. We document everything, the threats, the harassment, the hired guns, and then we take it all to the territorial marshal ourselves, force him to investigate whether he wants to or not. The marshal won't come. Clayton bought him off 5 years ago. Maybe. Or maybe he just wasn't properly motivated. Either way, we build the case first, gather the evidence, make it impossible to ignore. And if the marshal still won't act, Caleb paused, then we handle it ourselves. Handle it how? He met her eyes, and his expression was hard. However we have to. They sat in silence for a long moment, the fire crackling between them, both understanding that they'd just crossed a line. They were no longer simply defending themselves. They were actively plotting against Clayton Briggs, moving from victims to combatants. It was a shift that changed everything. I'm scared, Lila admitted quietly. Not of dying exactly, but of what this might turn us into, of what we might have to do to survive. I know, I'm scared too. You don't seem scared. I'm good at hiding it. Caleb stood and moved to the window again, restless. I've done things, Lila, bad things, in the name of justice, or money, or just because I was told to. And each time I told myself it was necessary, that the ends justified the means, but they didn't. The means became the ends, and I became someone I didn't recognize. He pressed his forehead against the glass. I don't want that to happen again. I don't want fighting Clayton to turn me back into the man I was. Then we'll make sure it doesn't. Lila rose and joined him at the window. We'll fight, but we'll fight clean. We'll be better than him, smarter than him, but we won't become him. That's the line we don't cross. And if crossing that line is the only way to win, then we find another way to win, or we lose with our souls intact. Either way, we stay human. Caleb looked at her, this woman who'd somehow become the center of his world in less than a week, and felt something shift in his chest. It wasn't love, not yet anyway, but it was close. It was the recognition of finding someone who saw the world the same way you did, who shared your values even when those values made life harder. You're remarkable, he said quietly. I'm terrified. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. She laughed, and this time it was genuine. No, I suppose they're not. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they stood together watching the street, both knowing that somewhere out there Clayton Briggs was planning their destruction, and both choosing to stand anyway. The attack came 2 nights later, when the moon was dark and the town was sleeping. Caleb woke to the smell of smoke. He was dressed and armed in seconds, his body moving on instinct honed by years of sleeping light in dangerous places. The smoke was coming from outside, thick and acrid, and when he threw open the window, he saw flames licking at the stable across the street. Fire! The shout went up from somewhere down the block. Fire at the stable! Caleb was down the stairs and out the door before Martha could emerge from her room. The street was already filling with people in nightclothes, carrying buckets, shouting instructions. The stable was fully engulfed, flames shooting 20 feet into the air, the heat so intense it was hard to approach. Jeremiah! Caleb shouted, scanning the crowd. Has anyone seen Jeremiah? He's inside. A woman pointed at the stable with a shaking hand. He sleeps in the office. He's still inside. Caleb didn't think. He grabbed a bucket of water, dumped it over his head, and ran straight into the inferno. The heat was overwhelming, stealing the air from his lungs and searing his skin, even through wet clothes. Smoke choked him, made his eyes water until he could barely see. He stumbled through the burning building, calling Jeremiah's name, dodging falling beams and collapsing stalls. He found the old man in the office, unconscious on the floor, blood on his temple where something had struck him. Caleb hoisted Jeremiah over his shoulder and ran back the way he'd come, the world narrowing to a tunnel of flame and smoke and the desperate need to reach fresh air. They burst out of the stable just as the roof collapsed behind them, the crash sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. Caleb laid Jeremiah on the ground, and someone, Martha, he realized, was there with water and blankets, checking the old man's pulse, wiping blood from his face. He's alive, she said. Unconscious, but alive. You got him out just in time. Caleb collapsed beside them, coughing so hard his ribs ached, his lungs burning with every breath. When he could finally speak, his voice was raw. What happened? How did it start? I saw them. A young boy pushed through the crowd, his face smudged with soot. Two men. They poured something on the walls, then lit it and ran. I tried to yell, tried to warn people, but it went up so fast. What did they look like? Caleb grabbed the boy's shoulders, perhaps too hard because the child flinched. The men who did this, what did they look like? I don't know. It was dark. But one of them was real big, and the other had a scar. And they rode horses with a brand I didn't recognize. Denver men. The professionals Clayton had hired. Caleb stood, swaying slightly, and looked at the burning stable. It was a total loss. The building, the equipment, the horses. Everything Jeremiah had built over 40 years, gone in less than 20 minutes. And for what? To send a message. To show what happened to people who helped Caleb Ward. Where's Lila? He asked suddenly, ice flooding his veins. Has anyone seen Lila? The crowd parted, and his heart stopped because she wasn't there. She should have been there. Her cottage was only 3 blocks away, close enough to hear the commotion, close enough to come running like everyone else. But she wasn't there. Caleb ran. He covered the 3 blocks at a dead sprint, his burned hands screaming protest, his lungs still raw from smoke. Lila's cottage came into view, and his worst fears materialized. The front door was standing open, lamplight spilling out into the darkness. Lila! He burst through the door, gun drawn, expecting to find, he didn't know what, violence, abduction, worse. Instead, he found Lila sitting calmly at her kitchen table, a shotgun across her lap, and 2 men tied to chairs across from her. Both men were bleeding from various wounds, and both looked significantly worse for wear. You're late, she said, not looking up. I was starting to think I'd have to handle this myself. Caleb stared, trying to process the scene. What? How? They came through the window while the fire was drawing everyone's attention. Thought they'd catch me sleeping, I suppose. She stood and walked around the tied men, the shotgun never wavering. Unfortunately for them, my father taught me to sleep light and shoot straight. The big one has a broken nose. The scarred one has a bullet graze across his ribs. Both have significantly damaged pride. The larger of the 2 men glared at Caleb. You're a dead man, Ward. You and your whore both. Clayton Briggs, don't forget. Lila slammed the shotgun barrel into his mouth, cutting off the words. Speak about me like that again, and I'll forget I'm a civilized woman with moral principles. Her voice was ice. Nod if you understand. The man nodded, blood trickling from his split lip. Caleb holstered his gun and approached slowly, still trying to reconcile this fierce, dangerous woman with the frightened schoolteacher from the alley. You took them both? By yourself? I had the advantage of surprise and rage. Rage is very motivating. She stepped back, allowing Caleb to see the men more clearly. They're from Denver, professional arsonists and intimidators, according to the conversation I overheard before I interrupted their plans with buckshot. Clayton hired them to burn the stable and... She paused, her jaw tightening. And to make sure I suffered an unfortunate accident that would look like I'd been overcome by smoke while trying to help fight the fire. They were going to kill you and make it look like the fire did it. That was the plan. It wasn't a very good plan, as it turns out. She met Caleb's eyes, and he saw the fear beneath her bravado. I killed a man tonight, Caleb. The scarred one had a partner who didn't make it out of my bedroom. I shot him, and he fell, and he didn't get back up. I'm a murderer. You're a survivor. There's a difference. Is there? Because it doesn't feel different. It feels like I crossed a line I can never uncross, like I became exactly what Clayton wanted me to become, someone who solves problems with violence. Caleb moved to her side and gently took the shotgun from her trembling hands. You defended yourself against men who came to kill you. That's not murder. That's justice. The law might disagree. The law is owned by Clayton Briggs. It stopped being about justice a long time ago. He set the shotgun aside and turned to face the tied men. Where's the third man? The one in Lila's bedroom? Dead, the scarred man spat. She killed him. Shot him through the heart like a cold-blooded... Caleb hit him, a short, vicious jab that snapped the man's head back. Watch your mouth. The lady saved your life by not killing you too. Show some gratitude. What are we going to do with them? Lila asked. We can't take them to the sheriff. He's Clayton's brother, and the deputy would just let them go. We're taking them to the territorial marshal, tonight, now, before Clayton can spin this into something else. Caleb hauled the larger man to his feet. You're going to ride with us to Denver, and you're going to tell the marshal everything. Who hired you? What you were paid to do? All of it. And if you refuse... He pressed his gun against the man's temple. If you refuse, I'll save the territory the cost of a trial and bury you in the desert where no one will ever find the body. Your choice. You won't shoot me, the man sneered. You need me alive to testify. I don't need both of you alive. Only one who's willing to talk. Caleb cocked the hammer. So I'll ask you one more time. Are you willing to testify against Clayton Briggs? The man's sneer faltered. You're bluffing. Am I? Caleb's eyes were dead, flat, and the man must have seen something in them that convinced him this wasn't a bluff, because his face went pale. All right, I'll talk. Just don't... Good decision. Caleb lowered the gun and turned to Lila. Pack what you need for a week. We're leaving in 20 minutes. What about the body? The dead man in my bedroom? We're taking him too. Evidence. The marshal will want to see what kind of men Clayton hired. Caleb moved toward the bedroom, then paused. Lila, are you sure you're ready for this? Once we go to Denver, once we make formal accusations against Clayton, there's no going back. He'll know we're coming for him, and he'll respond accordingly. She straightened her shoulders, and despite the fear in her eyes, her voice was steady. I stopped having the option to go back the moment I refused his brother's proposal. Now I only have the option to go forward. So let's go forward. 25 minutes later, they rode out of Redemption Springs in the pre-dawn darkness. Caleb, Lila, two bound prisoners on horseback, and a body wrapped in canvas tied across a pack horse. Behind them, the stable still smoldered, and the town still slept, unaware that everything was about to change. They rode hard through the night and into the next day, stopping only to water the horses and allow their prisoners brief respites. The journey to Denver normally took 3 days, but Caleb pushed them to make it in 2, driven by the knowledge that every hour they delayed gave Clayton more time to prepare his defense. The scarred man, who finally admitted his name was Jack Reeves, proved surprisingly talkative once he understood the alternatives. He told them everything. How Clayton had contacted a hiring agency in Denver that specialized in providing security services to wealthy clients with problems that needed discreet solutions. How he and his partners, the dead man was named Cole and the large one was called Dutch, had been paid $500 each to burn the stable and eliminate Lila Harper in a way that wouldn't raise suspicions. How Clayton had provided them with detailed information about the town, the layout of Lila's house, even the schedule of when various people would be where. He's done this before, Reeves said on the second day, his voice hoarse from thirst and fear. Hired people like us. We weren't the first, won't be the last. He's got a whole network. Judges who owe him favors, lawmen who look the other way, businessmen who help him hide money and assets. You think taking him down will be as simple as showing up with testimony and a body? You're fools. He'll have 10 lawyers waiting, all with explanations that make perfect legal sense, and you'll be the ones who end up in jail for kidnapping and assault. Maybe, Caleb said, Or maybe the marshal will actually do his job for once. The marshal? Reeves laughed, bitter and disbelieving. The territorial marshal is Clayton's cousin. Didn't you know? The whole territory is stitched together with family connections and bought loyalty. There's no one to appeal to, no authority that isn't already in Clayton's pocket. You're riding to Denver to report a crime to the very people who helped plan it. The words landed like stones in water, creating ripples of doubt. Caleb glanced at Lila, saw the same uncertainty reflected in her face. If Reeves was telling the truth, if the corruption went all the way to the territorial level, then they were riding straight into a trap. What would you do? Lila asked Reeves suddenly. In our position, what would you do? The scarred man was quiet for a long moment, considering. I'd run. Take whatever money you got, ride as far from Colorado territory as horses can carry you, and start over somewhere Clayton Briggs's name means nothing. Mexico, maybe. Or California. Somewhere his reach doesn't extend. And abandon everyone else in Redemption Springs to his mercy? What mercy? They made their choices, just like you're making yours. You can't save people who won't save themselves, lady. You can only save yourself and the ones you love. Lila fell back beside Caleb as they rode, her voice low. What if he's right? What if we're riding into a trap? Then we spring the trap and see what happens. Caleb kept his eyes on the horizon, where the mountains rose like broken teeth against the sky. But I don't think Reeves is telling us everything. He's scared, and scared men exaggerate. Maybe the marshal is corrupt. Maybe he's not. Either way, we have evidence, 2 living witnesses and a dead body. That's more than anyone's had before. And if it's not enough, then we try something else. But we don't quit. Not while there's still fight left in us. They reached Denver on the evening of the second day, riding into a city that felt impossibly large and crowded after the isolation of Redemption Springs. The territorial marshal's office was located in a stone building near the courthouse, and they arrived just as the clerks were preparing to close for the night. The marshal himself, a man named William Preston, gray-haired and perpetually exhausted-looking, listened to their story with the expression of someone who'd heard every variation of frontier injustice and stopped being surprised years ago. He examined the body, interviewed the prisoners separately, and read through the documents Caleb had brought from the bank with meticulous attention to detail. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. These are serious allegations. Conspiracy to commit murder, arson, fraud, corruption of public officials. If even half of what you're claiming is true, Clayton Briggs should be arrested immediately. So you'll do it? Lila leaned forward, hope and desperation warring in her eyes. You'll go to Redemption Springs and bring him to justice? Preston was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence, Caleb felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. He knew that pause, had heard it before in other offices, other officials who found reasons why justice was complicated and justice delayed was justice denied. It's not that simple, Preston said finally. Clayton Briggs is a prominent citizen with significant legal representation. I can't just arrest him based on the testimony of 2 admitted criminals and circumstantial evidence. I need more. Corroborating witnesses, physical proof, a pattern of behavior documented by multiple independent sources. We're giving you that proof, Caleb said, his voice hard. We're giving you everything. You're giving me enough to start an investigation, but an investigation takes time, weeks, maybe months. I'll need to interview townspeople, examine bank records, coordinate with other territorial offices, and during that time, Clayton will be free to continue his operations, possibly to retaliate against you for coming forward. So you're saying we risked everything to bring you this evidence, and you're going to do nothing? Lila's voice was rising, anger breaking through her careful control. We're telling you a man tried to have me murdered, and you're worried about proper procedure? I'm worried about building a case that will stand up in court, Preston shot back, his own frustration showing. I've gone after men like Clayton Briggs before, powerful men with resources and connections. And every time I've rushed the process, cut corners, relied on questionable witnesses, every single time they've walked free. Because their lawyers tear apart weak cases, exploit procedural errors, and make the prosecution look incompetent. If I'm going to bring down Clayton Briggs, I need to do it right, which means slow, methodical, by the book. By which time he'll have killed us and covered his tracks so thoroughly you'll never prove anything. Preston spread his hands in a gesture of helpless frustration. I know. I understand the position this puts you in, but I'm one man with limited resources trying to enforce law across an entire territory. I can't protect everyone, and I can't move faster than the legal system allows. The best I can offer is to begin the investigation immediately and to suggest you find somewhere safe to stay while it proceeds. Caleb stood, the chair scraping harsh against the floor. We didn't ride 2 days to be told to hide while Clayton gets away with attempted murder. Then what did you ride 2 days for? Because if you're expecting me to form a posse and ride to Redemption Springs to arrest Clayton Briggs tonight, that's not going to happen. Not without proper warrants, not without jurisdictional authority, not without evidence that meets legal standards. Preston's voice softened slightly. I'm not your enemy, Mr. Ward. I want justice as much as you do. But I also want justice that lasts, that can't be overturned on appeal or dismissed on technicalities, and that requires patience. Patience gets people killed. Impatience gets cases thrown out. Choose your poison. They left the marshal's office as the sun was setting, painting Denver's streets in shades of orange and gold that felt mockingly beautiful. Lila walked beside Caleb in silence for several blocks before finally speaking. He's not going to help us. Not really. He'll investigate, file paperwork, follow procedures, and by the time he's ready to act, Clayton will have disappeared the evidence and made us look like vengeful liars. Her voice was hollow, defeated. We came all this way for nothing. Not nothing. We tried the legal route. Now we know it won't work. Caleb stopped at the edge of a small park, looking back toward the mountains they'd crossed. Which means we go back to Redemption Springs and handle this ourselves. How? We can't fight Clayton and his men. We can burn his empire down the same way he's been building it, one piece at a time. We find his weaknesses, exploit them, turn his own tactics against him. Caleb turned to face her. He controls the town through fear and debt. So we eliminate the debt. We find every person he's got trapped in unfair contracts and we pay them off, free them, give them the courage to stand up. We document every illegal thing he does, every threat, every bribe. We gather so much evidence that when Preston finally decides to move, Clayton will be buried under the weight of his own corruption. That could take months, years even. Then we take months, years, however long it requires. He took her hands. I know this isn't the answer you wanted. I know you hoped the law would swoop in and solve everything, but sometimes the law is just another tool of oppression, and the only way to get real justice is to build it yourself, piece by piece, day by day. Are you willing to do that? Lila looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, and slowly, painfully, she nodded. I'm willing. But Caleb, I'm also terrified of what this will cost us, of what we might have to become to win, of losing myself in the fight and waking up one day to discover I'm no better than Clayton. That won't happen because we'll remind each other who we are and why we're fighting. We'll be each other's compass, pointing back to humanity when the darkness gets too thick. He squeezed her hands. Together. That's how we survive this. Together. They found a boarding house for the night, separate rooms to maintain appearances, though Caleb found himself unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the war they were about to wage. It was a war without clear battle lines, without rules of engagement, without any guarantee of victory. But it was their war, fought on their terms, and that had to count for something. In the morning, they would ride back to Redemption Springs. They would face Clayton's inevitable fury. They would begin the long, grinding work of dismantling his empire brick by brick. And they would do it together, two people, against a town, against a system, against corruption that had calcified into something that looked like law but was really just tyranny in a suit. Caleb had spent years running from fights like this, from complications, from entanglements, from caring about anything more than his own survival. But lying in that borrowed bed in a strange city, he found he didn't want to run anymore. He wanted to stand. He wanted to fight. And if that fight consumed him, at least he'd go down swinging for something that mattered. Outside, Denver slept on, indifferent to the small dramas of frontier justice and the quiet revolutions that began with two people refusing to surrender. But somewhere in the darkness, Caleb Ward made a promise to himself. Clayton Briggs would fall. It might take time, might cost everything, might require sacrifices he couldn't yet imagine. But the tyrant would fall. And when he did, Redemption Springs would finally live up to its name. They rode back into Redemption Springs 3 days after leaving it, and the town that greeted them felt like a different place entirely. The burned skeleton of Jeremiah's stable stood as a blackened monument to Clayton's reach, and people who'd once offered cautious nods now averted their eyes completely. The silence was oppressive, heavy with unspoken fear and the weight of choices not made. Caleb felt it the moment they crossed into town, the shift in atmosphere, the way conversations died as they passed, the way shutters closed and doors locked. They'd become ghosts, he and Lila, warnings of what happened to those who challenged the established order. Martha met them at the boarding house, her face carved from granite. "You shouldn't have come back." "We live here," Caleb said, dismounting. "You survived here." "There's a difference, and survival just got a lot harder." She gestured them inside, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting watchers. Once the door was closed, her composure cracked slightly. "Clayton knows you went to Denver, knows you took his hired men. He's been telling everyone you kidnapped innocent travelers, murdered one of them in cold blood, and are wanted by territorial authorities for a dozen crimes I can't even remember." "And people believe him?" Lila's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "People believe what they need to believe to sleep at night. If Clayton's the villain, that makes them complicit for doing nothing. But if you're the villains, if you're dangerous criminals who came here to cause trouble, then their inaction becomes self-preservation instead of cowardice." Martha poured coffee with shaking hands. "Jeremiah's recovering, by the way. Burns on his hands and arms, smoke damage to his lungs, but he'll live. He's staying with his nephew at the general store." "I need to see him," Caleb said. "You need to stay out of sight. Clayton's got men watching for you. The minute you show your face, they'll arrest you on fabricated charges or just shoot you and claim self-defense." Martha set down the coffee pot with more force than necessary. "You went to Denver for help and got nothing. What's your plan now?" Caleb exchanged a glance with Lila. They'd discussed this on the ride back, turning over options and strategies until their voices were hoarse and their conclusions were clear. "We dismantle him, piece by piece, that's starting with the people he's got trapped in debt." Martha's laugh was sharp and humorless. "There are 40 families in this town under contract to Briggs Bank. You planning to pay off all their debts too? Because even with your resources, Mr. Ward, that's more money than exists in 3 counties. I don't need to pay them all, just enough to show it can be done, enough to give people hope that there's a way out." Caleb leaned forward. "Fear only works when people believe they have no options. The moment they see an alternative, the moment they realize Clayton's grip can be broken, that's when everything changes." "And what alternative are you offering? A gunfight? A range war? Because that's what this becomes if you keep pushing. Clayton won't let you just buy your way to victory. Then he'll have to stop us by force, in front of witnesses, in ways that can't be explained away or hidden." Lila's voice was cold, determined. "We're done playing by his rules, Martha. We tried legal channels and got nothing. So now we force his hand. We make him react instead of act. And when he does, we make sure everyone sees exactly who he really is." Martha studied them both for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted, resignation giving way to something that might have been respect. "You're both going to die. You know that, right? Clayton's killed better people than you for less." "Maybe," Caleb acknowledged. "But at least we'll die fighting instead of suffocating slowly under his boot." Thomas Harper said the same thing. Martha's voice was soft, sad, and look where it got him. Thomas Harper fought alone. We're not alone. Caleb reached across the table and took Martha's weathered hand. We need allies. People who are tired of being afraid, who remember what this town was before Clayton poisoned it. People like you. I'm 63 years old. I run a boarding house. What possible use could I be in a war? You know everyone's secrets. You hear things, see things, remember things that other people forget or ignore. That makes you more valuable than a dozen gunfighters. He squeezed her hand gently. We're not asking you to pick up a rifle, Martha. We're asking you to do what you already do. Listen, observe, and share what you learn. That's all. Martha pulled her hand back, but her eyes were wet. You're asking me to betray my neutrality, to take a side after 30 years of keeping my head down. We're asking you to choose justice over comfort, and we understand if that's too much to ask. She was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee cup as if it held answers. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady despite the tears on her cheeks. My husband died 20 years ago. Fell off a ladder fixing the boarding house roof. At least, that's what the inquest said. But the night before he died, he told me he'd found evidence of Clayton embezzling from the town treasury. He was planning to take it to the territorial auditor the next morning. She looked up, meeting Caleb's eyes. Do I think Clayton killed him? I don't know. I'll never know. But I know my husband was careful on ladders, and I know that evidence disappeared along with him. So yes, Mr. Ward, you have your ally. Tell me what you need. The network began small. Martha connected them with her nephew Samuel at the general store, who connected them with a rancher named William Chen, whose land bordered Clayton's holdings. Chen introduced them to a widow named Rebecca Walsh, who'd lost her farm to Briggs Bank and now worked as a seamstress, barely surviving. Each person led to another, and slowly, carefully, they built a web of quiet resistance. Caleb used his remaining funds strategically, paying off the debts of families Clayton had trapped most viciously. A farmer named Jacob Morrison, who'd borrowed against 3 bad harvests and was facing foreclosure. A blacksmith named Thomas Green, whose equipment had been purchased through predatory loans. A young couple, Daniel and Sarah Chen, who'd signed contracts they didn't fully understand and now owed more than they'd ever borrowed. Each debt Caleb paid off was a small victory, a crack in Clayton's foundation. And with each victory, more people found their courage. But Clayton wasn't idle. His response came exactly 1 week after Caleb and Lila returned from Denver, and it came with the cold precision of a man who'd waited long enough. Caleb was at Lila's cottage, reviewing loan documents by lamplight, when the first shot shattered the window. He hit the floor, dragging Lila down with him, as 3 more shots punched through the walls. Wood splintered, glass exploded, and the lamp toppled, spilling oil across the table, but miraculously not igniting. "Stay down," Caleb hissed, drawing his Colt and crawling toward the window. He risked a glance outside and saw muzzle flashes from 3 different positions: the barn, the tree line, and behind the well. Professional placement, coordinated fire. These weren't drunk cowboys taking pot shots. These were men who knew what they were doing. "How many?" Lila was beside him, her own shotgun in hand, her face pale but focused. "At least 3. Maybe more." Caleb fired twice toward the barn, not expecting to hit anything but establishing that they could shoot back. "We need to move. They've got us pinned down here." "There's a root cellar. Entrance through the kitchen floor." Lila was already crawling toward the kitchen, staying low. "We can get out through the tunnel. It exits behind the chicken coop." "Your father built an escape tunnel?" He was paranoid. Turns out he was right to be. She hauled up a section of floorboards, revealing darkness below. "Go. I'll cover you." "Like hell. You go. I'll cover." "We don't have time to argue about who's more expendable." Lila fired the shotgun out the window, the blast deafening in the small space. "Move!" Caleb dropped into the cellar, landing hard on packed earth. Above him, Lila fired again, then descended with a speed that suggested she'd practiced this route many times. She pulled the floorboards back into place just as heavier fire raked the cottage, bullets punching through walls like they were paper. The tunnel was narrow, dark, and smelled of earth and old vegetables. They crawled through it by feel, Lila leading, emerging finally into the cool night air behind the chicken coop. The firing had stopped, and in the sudden silence they could hear voices, men calling to each other, coordinating. "They're going in," Caleb whispered, checking to see if they got us. "Then we need to move before they realize we're not there." Lila grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the fence line. "There's a path through the woods. It leads to the old mining road. We can circle back to town from there." They ran, keeping low, using every scrap of cover. Behind them, shouts erupted. Someone had discovered the empty cottage. Lanterns began moving through the darkness, searching. Caleb and Lila reached the tree line and kept running, branches whipping their faces, roots trying to trip them. The mining road appeared ahead, a pale ribbon in the moonlight, and they followed it at a pace that left them both gasping. "Where are we going?" Lila managed between breaths. "Martha's. It's the last place they'd expect us to hide." Caleb slowed as they approached the edge of town, scanning for watchers. "We go in through the back, quiet as we can. No lights, No noise. Can you do that? I just crawled through a tunnel while people were shooting at my house. I think I can manage quiet. They slipped through Redemption Springs like shadows, using alleys and backlots, avoiding the main street where Deputy Briggs and his men were likely stationed. Martha's boarding house appeared ahead, dark except for a single lamp in the kitchen window, their agreed signal that it was safe to approach. Martha let them in without a word, locked the door behind them, and ushered them to a back room that smelled of lavender and old books. They hit Jacob Morrison's farm an hour ago, burned his barn, shot his dog, told him he had 24 hours to leave town or they'd come back for his family. Is he leaving? Caleb asked. No, he's sitting on his porch with a rifle, daring them to try again. Martha's expression was fierce with pride and terror. William Chen rode out to sit with him. So did Thomas Green and 4 others. They're making a stand, Caleb, because of you, because you showed them it was possible. And now they're targets because of me. They were always targets. You just gave them a reason to fight back instead of waiting to be destroyed. Martha poured whiskey into 3 glasses and handed them around. But Clayton's escalating. Tonight's attacks weren't just about intimidation, they were about elimination. He's done playing games. He wants you dead, and he's willing to burn the whole town down to make it happen. Lila drained her whiskey in one swallow, grimacing at the burn. Then we need to end this. Not in weeks or months, but now, tonight, before more people get hurt. How? Martha asked. You can't fight Clayton's men in open combat. You're outnumbered and outgunned. We don't fight his men. We fight him. Caleb set down his glass, a plan forming. Clayton's power comes from fear and money. We can't take away the money fast enough, but fear we can break in one night if we're willing to risk everything. What are you suggesting? Lila's eyes were sharp, focused. I'm suggesting we go to Clayton's house, right now. We walk in through his front door and we have a conversation he can't ignore or spin or hide from. We make him understand that the old rules don't apply anymore. That he can hire all the guns he wants, but we're not going anywhere. And every time he strikes at us, we'll strike back twice as hard. That's suicide, Martha breathed. His house is a fortress. He's got guards, weapons, every advantage. You'll never make it past the front gate. We don't need to fight our way in. We need him to invite us in. Caleb looked at Lila. You still have that teaching certification review letter? She nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. You want to use it as leverage. I want to use it as bait. We send word that we're willing to negotiate, that you'll consider accepting terms if Clayton will meet with us personally. No intermediaries, no lawyers. Just a conversation between reasonable people looking to resolve their differences. He'll never believe that. He doesn't have to believe it. He just has to be arrogant enough to think he can manipulate us face to face, that he can intimidate us into surrender now that we've had a taste of his power. And Clayton is nothing if not arrogant. Martha shook her head in disbelief. And when you're face to face with him, what then? You threaten him? Beg him? Shoot him in his own home and hope the law doesn't hang you for murder? We tell him the truth, that we have evidence of his crimes, written testimony from Jack Reeves and Dutch, documents showing his fraudulent loans, witness statements from everyone in town he's victimized, that we've already sent copies to the territorial auditor, the federal land office, and 3 newspapers in Denver, and that if anything happens to us, if we disappear or die in convenient accidents, all of that evidence becomes public and his empire collapses under the weight of investigation. But we haven't done any of that, Lila said. Not yet. But we can. Tonight. Right now, while he's celebrating what he thinks is his victory. Caleb stood, energy coursing through him. Martha, I need you to ride to every person we've helped, every ally we've made. Tell them what we're planning and ask them to document everything they know about Clayton's criminal activities. Every fraudulent contract, every bribe, every threat. Get it all in writing, signed and witnessed. That'll take hours. We've got until dawn. That's when we deliver our message to Clayton. He turned to Lila. Can you write? Formal testimony laying out everything that's happened, the attempted murder, the arson, the corruption, something that would stand up in court if we need it to. I can write. Her voice was steady, committed. But Caleb, even if we pull this off, even if we bluff Clayton into backing down, he'll eventually call that bluff. And when he does, we'd better have made it real. which means we have maybe a week to actually gather that evidence and get it into the right hands before Clayton figures out we're running a long con. Caleb moved to the window, looking out at the dark town. It's a risk, a huge risk, but it's the only play we have that doesn't end with more people dead. Martha stood, her decision made. I'll get the statements. You write the testimony. And pray to whatever forces govern this cruel world that Clayton's pride makes him stupid enough to fall for this. She left through the back door, moving with surprising speed for a woman her age, and suddenly Caleb and Lila were alone in the quiet room with lamplight casting shadows that danced like ghosts. This could work, Lila said softly, or it could get us killed. Probably both. Caleb pulled her close, and she came willingly, resting her head against his chest. I'm sorry. For bringing you into this, for making you a target, for every moment of fear and pain. Stop. She looked up at him, her eyes fierce. You didn't bring me into this. Clayton did, years before you arrived. You just gave me a fighting chance instead of forcing me to surrender. That's not something to apologize for. Still, if something happens to me tonight, if this goes wrong, if something happens to you, I'll finish what we started. I'll gather that evidence, send it to every authority who'll listen, and I'll make sure Clayton Briggs pays for every life he's destroyed, including yours. She touched his face, her fingers gentle. But nothing's going to happen to you. We're going to walk into that house. We're going to bluff the most dangerous man in the territory, and we're going to walk out alive. Because we're smarter than him, braver than him, and we have something he'll never understand. What's that? We have something worth dying for. All he has is things worth killing for. That's the difference. That's why we'll win. Caleb kissed her then, a fierce, desperate kiss that tasted of whiskey and hope, and the knowledge that they might both be dead by morning. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard, both understanding that something fundamental had shifted between them. When this is over, he said quietly, when Clayton's finished and the town is safe, what then? Then we figure out what we want to be to each other, if we're partners who fought a war together and went our separate ways, or if we're something more. She smiled, sad and hopeful. But first we have to survive the war. They worked through the night. Lila wrote with the precision of someone trained in documentation, laying out every crime, every threat, every moment of terror in language that was clear and damning. Caleb organized the papers they'd accumulated, cross-referencing contracts and highlighting the clauses that proved fraudulent intent. And slowly, methodically, they built a case that would destroy Clayton Briggs if it ever saw daylight. Martha returned just before dawn with a leather satchel stuffed with papers, statements from 19 families, all signed, all witnessed, all documenting years of abuse and manipulation. They're scared, she reported, terrified that this will provoke Clayton into worse violence, but they're also angry. Angrier than I've ever seen them. Whatever you're planning, you've got more support than you realize. It's just buried under layers of fear. Fear we're about to break. Caleb loaded his Colt and checked his rifle. How do we get word to Clayton that we want to meet? I'll send my nephew. Samuel's neutral enough that Clayton won't suspect a trap. Martha's hands were shaking as she poured coffee. Where do you want the meeting? His house? 9 o'clock this morning. Just him, no guards, no weapons. We come unarmed to show good faith. You're going to walk into Clayton Briggs' house unarmed? We're going to walk in appearing unarmed. There's a difference. Caleb patted his boot where a small derringer was hidden. Tell Samuel to emphasize that Lila is willing to discuss terms regarding the teaching certification and her continued residence in Redemption Springs. Make it sound like surrender. Clayton needs to believe he's won. Samuel delivered the message at 7:30, returning 45 minutes later with Clayton's response. The meeting was accepted, 9 o'clock at the Briggs estate. Clayton would be alone as requested, and he looked forward to resolving their differences in a civilized manner. He's gloating, Martha said, reading the note. He thinks you've broken. Good. Arrogance makes people careless. Caleb checked his pocket watch, 8:15. Time to move. He looked at Lila, saw his own fear reflected in her eyes, and took her hand. Last chance to back out. We could run right now, disappear into the mountains, start over somewhere else. We could, she agreed, but we won't. Because running means Clayton wins, and I'm done letting men like him win. They rode to Clayton's estate as the sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. The house was exactly as Caleb expected. A sprawling two-story structure of stone and timber, expensive and imposing, surrounded by manicured grounds that spoke of wealth and power. 2 guards stood at the gate, but as promised, they stepped aside when Caleb and Lila approached. "Mr. Briggs is expecting you," one said. "Main parlor, straight through." They walked up the gravel drive, their footsteps loud in the quiet morning. The front door stood open, and inside, the house was a monument to acquired taste. Imported furniture, oil paintings, Persian rugs. Every surface screamed money, and every piece seemed chosen to intimidate rather than comfort. Clayton waited for them in the parlor, seated in a leather chair that might as well have been a throne. He wore a smoking jacket and held a brandy despite the early hour, the picture of relaxed confidence. "Miss Harper, Mr. Ward, please sit." He gestured to chairs across from him. "I'm so glad you've come to your senses. This unpleasantness has gone on far too long." "Has it?" Caleb remained standing, and Lila did the same. "I'd say it's just getting started." Clayton's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "I was told you wanted to negotiate terms. Was that a lie?" "No, we do want to negotiate, but not surrender terms, partnership terms." Caleb pulled the leather satchel from his coat and set it on the table between them with a heavy thud. "This contains documented evidence of every crime you've committed in the past 20 years. Fraud, extortion, bribery, conspiracy to commit murder, arson, testimony from witnesses, copies of fraudulent contracts, financial records showing embezzlement from the town treasury. Everything." Clayton's expression didn't change, but his hand tightened on his brandy glass. "I see. And I suppose you're threatening to take this to the authorities?" "We already have. Copies have been sent to the territorial auditor, the federal land office, and 3 newspapers in Denver. They're in sealed envelopes with instructions to open them if we fail to send a weekly confirmation that we're alive and well." Caleb leaned forward. "You can't kill us anymore, Clayton. Our deaths would guarantee your destruction. And you can't intimidate the rest of the town because they know help is coming. The empire you've built over 30 years is balanced on a knife's edge, and we're the only thing keeping it from falling." The silence that followed was absolute. Clayton set down his brandy with careful precision, stood, and walked to the window. When he turned back, all pretense of civility had evaporated. "You're bluffing. You rode to Denver and got nothing. Preston won't move without perfect evidence, and you don't have time to gather perfect evidence before I destroy you both." "Maybe we are bluffing." Lila's voice was steel. "There's one way to find out. Kill us. Have us shot, drowned, burned, whatever creative accident you've planned. And then wait to see if those envelopes get opened. Wait to see if federal investigators arrive. Wait to see if your carefully constructed legal empire collapses into criminal prosecution." She stepped closer to Clayton. "Or you could accept that you've lost this round, that we're no longer victims you can manipulate, that from this moment forward, every move you make will counter, every threat will match, every crime will document, until eventually the weight of evidence becomes too great even for your lawyers to dismiss." Clayton studied her for a long moment, and Caleb saw calculation happening behind those cold eyes. The man was weighing options, assessing risks, trying to find an angle that gave him advantage. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was different, less smooth, more honest. "What do you want?" "We want you to leave us alone. No more attacks, no more threats, no more using the law as a weapon. You stay in your lane, we'll stay in ours." Caleb picked up the satchel. "The original documents stay with us. The copies stay sealed as long as you honor the agreement. You get to keep your empire, your reputation, your freedom. We get to live without fear of murder. Everyone wins. Except I don't get Lila. Or her land." "You never had either of those things. You just thought you did." Lila's voice was firm. "My father's debt is paid, my property is free and clear, and I'll die before I marry your brother or anyone else I don't choose freely. Those are facts, Clayton. The only question is whether you accept them peacefully or fight a war you can't win." Clayton moved back to his chair and sank into it, suddenly looking older and more tired. "You've thought this through. I'll give you that. But you're also naive if you think this ends here. You've made enemies, not just me, but everyone whose interests align with mine. Bankers, lawyers, territorial officials. They'll come after you eventually, legal or otherwise. Let them come. We'll handle them the same way we handled you. Caleb moved toward the door. One more thing. Jacob Morrison, William Chen, Thomas Green, all the people you targeted last night, they're under our protection now. You touch them, you trigger the same consequences as touching us. Clear? Crystal. Clayton raised his brandy in a mock toast. You've won this battle, Mr. Ward. I'll concede that much. But the war? The war is far from over, and I'm a patient man. I can wait for you to make a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes eventually. Then I guess you'll be waiting a long time. They left the estate as the sun climbed toward noon, walking back down that gravel drive with their backs exposed and their hearts pounding. Caleb half expected a bullet, but none came. They reached their horses, mounted, and rode back toward town in silence. It wasn't until they were halfway back that Lila finally spoke. We did it. We actually did it. We bluffed the most dangerous man in the territory and lived. We did. Caleb felt the tension draining from his shoulders, replaced by exhaustion so profound he could barely stay in the saddle. Now we just have to make good on our bluff before Clayton figures out we were lying. How long do you think we have? A week, maybe 2 if we're lucky. He'll wait to see if those envelopes are real, and when nothing happens, he'll know we were running a con. Caleb looked at her. Which means we have 2 weeks to actually send that evidence to everyone we claimed we already sent it to make the bluff real. Can we do it? We don't have a choice. It's the only thing keeping us alive. They rode into Redemption Springs to find the town transformed. Word of their meeting with Clayton had spread, and people lined the streets watching their return with expressions that ranged from awe to terror to something that might have been hope. Jacob Morrison was there, his face still bearing bruises from the night's attack. William Chen, Thomas Green, Martha, Samuel, Jeremiah, still bandaged but standing tall. These were people who'd chosen to stand when standing was dangerous, who'd documented their abuse, signed their names to testimony, risked everything on the belief that justice was possible. Caleb looked at them and felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a physical thing. These people were counting on him, trusting him, believing that he could deliver on promises he wasn't sure he could keep. He dismounted in front of Martha's boarding house, and the small crowd that had gathered waited in silence for him to speak. Clayton Briggs won't be troubling us anymore, he said, his voice carrying in the quiet morning. He's agreed to leave us alone, to stop the attacks, to honor the debts that have been paid. We're safe. For now. A murmur rippled through the crowd, relief mixed with disbelief. But this isn't over, Caleb continued. We bought ourselves time, but time runs out. So we need to use it wisely. We need to document everything, gather evidence, build a case so strong that when we finally take it to the authorities, they'll have no choice but to act. That's going to take work. From all of us. Everyone who's suffered under Clayton's rule, everyone who's been cheated or threatened or victimized, we need your stories. We need your proof. We need your courage. Jacob Morrison stepped forward. You've got mine, whatever you need. Mine too, William Chen said. One by one, others joined in, voices rising in a chorus of commitment. Not everyone. Some stayed silent, still too afraid to take that final step. But enough. Enough to matter. Enough to build something real from the bluff they'd sold Clayton. Lila dismounted and stood beside Caleb, and together they faced the town they were fighting to save. We're going to win, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but we're going to break Clayton's hold on this town and build something better in its place, something where people don't have to choose between surrender and destruction, something worth fighting for. The crowd erupted in scattered applause, and Caleb felt something shift. This was real now, not just him and Lila against Clayton, but a community finding its voice, its strength, its collective power. They'd lit a spark in that alley weeks ago, and now it was growing into a flame that might just consume the corruption that had ruled Redemption Springs for 30 years. But flames were dangerous, unpredictable, and Clayton Briggs wasn't the type to go quietly into defeat. As the crowd dispersed and people returned to their lives with new hope in their eyes, Caleb pulled Martha aside. We need to work fast, really fast. Get me a list of every newspaper editor, every territorial official, every federal agent who might care about Frontier corruption. We're going to send that evidence everywhere. Make so many copies that Clayton can't possibly suppress them all. That's going to cost money. A lot of money. I've got money. What I don't have is time. He looked toward Clayton's estate, barely visible in the distance. He's already planning his countermove, and when it comes, it's going to be bigger and more vicious than anything we've seen. We need to be ready. Martha nodded grimly. I'll start making the list. You get some rest. You look half dead. I feel fully dead, Caleb managed a tired smile. But I'll rest when this is finished. Not before. He found Lila in her cottage, or what remained of it. Bullet holes scarred the walls, broken glass littered the floor, and the smell of gunpowder still hung in the air. She stood in the middle of the wreckage, looking at the destruction with an expression Caleb couldn't quite read. It can be fixed, he said from the doorway. Can it? She turned to face him. The house, maybe. But what about us? What about the people who died? Cole, the man I killed. What about the innocents we've lost? The lines we've crossed? Can those be fixed? I don't know. Maybe some things stay broken. He crossed to her side, careful of the glass. But broken doesn't mean worthless. Broken can be rebuilt into something stronger, something that knows its own vulnerabilities and protects them. Is that what we are now? Broken things rebuilding? Maybe. Or maybe we're just people trying to do the right thing in a world that makes doing the right thing almost impossible. He took her hand. Either way, we're doing it together. That has to count for something. She leaned against him, and they stood in the wreckage of her home, two people who'd found each other in chaos and chosen to build something worth protecting from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Outside, Redemption Springs continued its daily rhythms. Shops opening, children heading to school, life persisting despite the violence that had erupted in its streets. The town didn't know yet that its salvation hung by a thread, that the peace Caleb and Lila had negotiated was built on lies that needed to become truth before Clayton discovered the deception. They had 2 weeks, maybe less. 2 weeks to gather evidence, send letters, build allies, and transform a desperate bluff into an unshakable reality. 2 weeks to save a town that had forgotten how to save itself. And somewhere in his fortress estate, Clayton Briggs sat in his leather chair drinking brandy and plotting his revenge, patient as winter and twice as cold. The war wasn't over. It had barely begun. But for the first time since riding into Redemption Springs with nothing but supplies on his mind, Caleb Ward believed they might actually have a chance to win. The 2 weeks that followed moved with the relentless momentum of an avalanche. Caleb and Lila worked 18-hour days, documenting every shred of evidence, copying testimonies until their fingers cramped and their eyes burned from lamplight. Martha coordinated the network of allies, collecting statements from victims across 3 counties who'd suffered under Clayton's schemes. Samuel rode between towns carrying sealed envelopes to newspaper editors, federal land agents, and territorial officials whose integrity was still intact. The bluff was becoming real, piece by careful piece. But Clayton wasn't waiting passively. On the 5th day, Jacob Morrison's water well was poisoned, killing 3 head of cattle before the contamination was discovered. On the 7th day, fire broke out in the schoolhouse late at night, caught early enough to be extinguished, but not before destroying half the books and leaving scorch marks that looked like warnings written in ash. On the 10th day, Deputy Briggs arrested William Chen on fabricated charges of horse theft, holding him for 2 days before lack of evidence forced his release. Each attack was calibrated to toe the line between breaking their agreement and maintaining plausible deniability. Clayton was probing for weaknesses, testing their resolve, reminding them that his patience had limits. He knows, Lila said on the 13th day, setting down her pen after hours of writing. He knows we were bluffing, and he's waiting for the right moment to strike. Maybe. Caleb was sorting through the latest batch of documents, 23 new testimonies, bank records Samuel had obtained from a clerk in the next county, and a letter from a federal investigator expressing preliminary interest in their claims. Or maybe he's just trying to make us panic and do something stupid. Either way, we're almost there. 3 more days and every envelope will be delivered, every authority notified. After that, Even if Clayton kills us both, the momentum will be unstoppable. 3 days is a long time when someone's trying to murder you. We've survived 13. What's 3 more? He tried to make it sound light, but they both heard the hollowness. They were exhausted, running on coffee and determination, jumping at shadows and sleeping in shifts with weapons close at hand. The strain was showing in Lila's face, new lines around her eyes, a tightness in her jaw that hadn't been there before. Caleb crossed to where she sat and knelt beside her chair. When this is over, when we've won and Clayton's finished and the town is safe, I want to ask you something important. But I'm not going to ask it while we're fighting for our lives, because I want your answer to be about us, not about survival. Lila touched his face, her fingers tracing the scar on his cheek. I already know what you're going to ask, and I already know my answer. Do you? I do. But you're right. Ask me when the war is over. Ask me when we can think about the future instead of just surviving the present. She leaned down and kissed him, soft and lingering. And Caleb? The answer's yes. It's always been yes. The moment was shattered by pounding on the door. Martha burst in without waiting for permission, her face white with terror. They've taken Jeremiah. Clayton's men grabbed him from the general store an hour ago. Samuel saw them put him in a wagon and head toward the old mine shaft out past the Morrison property. Caleb was on his feet instantly, checking his weapons. How many men? 4 that Samuel saw, but there could be more. Martha grabbed his arm. This is a trap, Caleb. Clayton knows you'll come for Jeremiah. He's counting on it. I know. He loaded his rifle with mechanical precision. But I'm going anyway, because if I don't, Jeremiah dies and everyone in this town learns that our protection means nothing, that Clayton can still take people with impunity. Then I'm coming with you, Lila said, reaching for her shotgun. No. You stay here, keep working. If this goes bad, if Clayton gets me, someone needs to finish what we started. Someone needs to make sure those envelopes get delivered and the truth gets told. He turned to Martha. Lock the doors. Don't let anyone in except Samuel. If I'm not back by midnight, assume I'm dead and proceed accordingly. Caleb! Lila's voice broke. Don't go. Please. We can find another way. There is no other way. We both know it. He pulled her close, holding her tight enough to memorize the feel of her in his arms. I'll come back, I promise. Don't make promises you can't keep. I've never broken a promise to you yet. He kissed her once more, fierce and desperate, then released her and headed for the door. Take care of her, Martha. No matter what happens, take care of her. He was gone before either woman could respond, moving through the darkening streets toward the stable where his horse waited. The old mine shaft was an hour's ride, and the sun was already setting, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold that felt ominously appropriate. Caleb rode hard, his mind working through scenarios and contingencies. Martha was right. This was obviously a trap. Clayton had taken Jeremiah specifically to draw Caleb out, to get him alone and vulnerable where he could be killed without witnesses. The smart play was to ignore the bait, let Jeremiah die, and continue building the case against Clayton. But Caleb had spent 15 years being smart, making calculated decisions that sacrificed individuals for larger goals, and he was done with that version of himself. If being better meant walking into traps to save people who mattered, then he'd walk into every trap Clayton could devise. The old mine shaft appeared ahead as full darkness fell, a boarded-up entrance carved into a hillside, surrounded by rusted equipment and the skeletal remains of structures that had once served the mining operation. A single wagon stood near the entrance, and lamplight flickered from inside the shaft. Caleb dismounted 100 yards away and approached on foot, using the scattered equipment for cover. He could hear voices echoing from the mine. At least 3 men, maybe 4. No sign of Jeremiah yet, but the old man had to be inside. He was 20 feet from the entrance when Deputy Briggs stepped out of the shadows, gun drawn. That's far enough, Ward. The deputy's face was grim, but there was something in his eyes that might have been regret. Drop your weapons. All of them. Or the old man dies right now. Caleb complied slowly, setting down his rifle and Colt, then removing the Derringer from his boot. Where's Jeremiah? Inside. Alive for now. Clayton wants to talk to you first. The deputy gestured toward the mine entrance. Move! Caleb walked into the shaft, the deputy following close behind. The tunnel stretched back into darkness. shored up with rotting timbers and smelling of damp earth and old explosives. Lamps hung at intervals, casting pools of sickly yellow light. They found Clayton 50 feet in, standing beside a support beam where Jeremiah was tied, bloodied but conscious. 3 more men flanked Clayton, hard-faced professionals who'd clearly done this kind of work before. "Mr. Ward," Clayton's voice echoed off the stone walls. "Punctual as always. I appreciate that in a man." "Let him go, Clayton. This is between you and me." "Is it? Because from where I'm standing, this is between me and an entire town that's suddenly grown a spine. And you're the infection that caused it, the foreign element that disrupted a system that worked perfectly well for 30 years. Clayton circled Caleb slowly, like a predator assessing prey. "I've been patient. I've honored our agreement mostly. Oh, a few small incidents here and there, but nothing that technically violated our terms. And in return, I've waited for you to produce these mysterious envelopes you claim to have sent. These copies of evidence that were supposed to bring investigators running to my door. They'll come. You just need to be more patient. I've been patient for 13 days, Mr. Ward, and no investigators have appeared. No federal agents, no territorial auditors, no newspaper reporters demanding interviews. Which tells me one of 2 things. Either the authorities don't care about your accusations, or those envelopes never existed in the first place." Clayton stopped in front of Caleb, his eyes cold. "I'm betting on option 2. I'm betting you walked into my house with nothing but audacity and bluffed me into a temporary truce while you scrambled to make your lies into truth. Am I wrong?" Caleb met his gaze without flinching. "Guess you'll find out soon enough." "Oh, I'll find out tonight, because you're going to tell me everything. Who you've contacted, what evidence you actually have, who's helping you, and then you and the old man are going to have an unfortunate accident deep in this mine shaft. A cave-in, perhaps. Or maybe you'll simply disappear and people will assume you finally got smart and ran. Either way, by morning, the resistance you've been building will collapse like a house of cards." "You think killing me stops anything? The people in this town have found their courage, Clayton. They're not going back to being afraid just because you murder the man who helped them stand up. They will when they realize standing up gets you killed. Fear is a powerful teacher, Mr. Ward. And tomorrow, this town is going to get a master class." Clayton gestured to his men. "String him up next to the old man. Make sure he's conscious for what comes next." 2 of the hired men moved forward, and Caleb didn't resist as they bound his hands and secured him to a support beam opposite Jeremiah. The old man's face was swollen from beatings, but his eyes were alert, defiant. "Shouldn't have come," Jeremiah whispered. "Was hoping you'd be smart enough to leave me. Nobody gets left behind. Not anymore." Caleb tested his bonds, tight, professionally done. No easy escape. "You all right?" "Been better. Been worse, too." Jeremiah managed a bloody smile. "Least I'll have company for whatever comes next." Clayton was conferring with his men in low voices, and Caleb used the moment to scan the mine shaft, looking for anything that could be used as advantage. The timbers supporting the tunnel were old, some visibly rotting. The lamps cast shadows that could hide movement, and there, near the tunnel entrance, a stack of old dynamite crates, probably unstable after years of neglect. A plan formed, desperate and dangerous, but better than waiting to be executed. "Clayton," Caleb called out, "before you kill me, I want to know something. Why? Why build an empire on fear and corruption when you're clearly smart enough to succeed legitimately? Why be a tyrant when you could have been a leader?" Clayton turned, surprised by the question. "Philosophy? Now? That's what you want to discuss?" "Humor a dying man." Clayton considered, then shrugged. "Because legitimate success is slow and uncertain. Because playing by the rules means other people have power over you, regulations, competitors, moral constraints. I wanted power that couldn't be taken away, wealth that couldn't be taxed or regulated or voted out of existence. So I built a system where I made the rules, where I controlled every lever of power, where resistance was futile." He smiled. "And it worked beautifully for 3 decades. Would have worked forever if you hadn't shown up playing hero." "And Thomas Harper? Lila's father? Did he have to die, or was that just convenient?" Something flickered in Clayton's expression, not quite guilt, but perhaps the ghost of it. Thomas was a problem that solved itself. He was careless around water after drinking. Accidents happen. You murdered him. I removed an obstacle. There's a difference. Clayton's voice hardened. Thomas Harper was a dreamer who thought principles mattered more than power. He was weak, and weakness gets you killed on the frontier, just like it's about to get you killed. Maybe. Or maybe you're about to learn that weakness you mistook for strength. Caleb met the deputy's eyes. Marcus, you're Clayton's brother. You followed his orders for years, but are you really willing to commit murder, to cross that line? Because once you do, there's no going back. You become what he is, a killer hiding behind a badge. Deputy Briggs' face twitched, uncertainty warring with loyalty. Shut up, Ward. He killed your other brother, you know. Thomas Harper wasn't the only person who drowned conveniently. Remember Byron Jr., the nephew who was supposed to inherit the bank? Found floating in that same river, same mysterious circumstances. You think that was accident too? That's a lie. Deputy Briggs turned to Clayton. Tell him it's a lie. But Clayton's silence was damning. The deputy's face went white, and his hand trembled on his gun. Marcus, Clayton said quietly, dangerously. Don't listen to him. He's trying to divide us, turn family against family. Everything I've done has been for the family, for our legacy. You killed Byron Jr. The deputy's voice was hollow. He was going to expose your embezzlement, and you killed him, your own nephew. He was weak, like Thomas Harper, like anyone who puts morality above survival. Clayton's mask had fallen away completely, revealing the monster beneath. In this world, Marcus, you're either predator or prey. I taught you that when you were 16 years old. Don't forget it now. The deputy stood frozen, gun in hand, loyalties shattering. And in that moment of hesitation, Caleb acted. He'd been working his bonds the entire conversation, using the rough timber to fray the rope. They gave way suddenly, and he lunged forward, grabbing the nearest lamp and hurling it at the dynamite crates. The world exploded into chaos. The dynamite was old, unstable, and the flame found it instantly. The blast wasn't huge, more of a violent combustion than true explosion, but it was enough. The tunnel entrance collapsed in a shower of rock and timber, cutting off escape and plunging half the shaft into darkness as lamps were extinguished by the concussion. Caleb hit the ground and rolled, his hands still partially bound but free enough to move. He heard shouting, gunfire, the crack of breaking timber. One of Clayton's men fired blindly into the darkness and hit a support beam, which gave way with a groan that sounded like the earth itself was screaming. "Get out!" someone yelled. "The whole tunnel's coming down!" Caleb found Jeremiah in the darkness and cut his bonds with a shard of broken rock. "Can you move?" "Do I have a choice?" The old man staggered upright, and together they stumbled deeper into the mine, away from the collapse, away from the gunfire, into passages that branched and twisted through the mountain's bones. Behind them, the tunnel continued its death throes. More timbers fell, more sections collapsed, and the voices of Clayton's men grew fainter, confused, panicked. The mountain was reclaiming the mine, and everyone inside had minutes at most to find another way out. Caleb and Jeremiah ran through darkness broken only by occasional shafts of moonlight filtering through ventilation holes. The old man knew these tunnels from his youth, when the mine was still operational, and he led them through a maze of passages that gradually climbed toward the surface. They emerged through a collapsed section of roof a quarter-mile from the main entrance, crawling out into the night air like men reborn. Behind them, the mountain continued to rumble and shift, sealing the mine shaft that had almost become their tomb. "Clayton?" Jeremiah asked, breathing hard. "Still inside. Him and his men." Caleb looked back at the hillside, now cratered and smoking. "If they make it out, it'll be through the main entrance, if that's not completely collapsed." They made their way around the hillside on foot, Caleb's horse having fled during the explosion. The main entrance was half collapsed, but as they watched, figures began emerging from the wreckage. Two of Clayton's hired men, bloodied and coughing, helping each other stumble into the open. Then Deputy Briggs appeared, supporting Clayton, who was limping badly and bleeding from a gash across his forehead. The four survivors saw Caleb and Jeremiah and stopped, and for a long moment the two groups stared at each other across 50 feet of rocky ground. No one had weapons, all lost in the collapse. It was just 6 men who'd been through hell, standing in the moonlight and deciding what came next. It was Deputy Briggs who broke the silence. "It's over, Clayton. Everything Ward said about you, about Byron Jr., about Thomas Harper, about all of it, I believe him. I'm done protecting you." "Marcus, no, I'm done." The deputy's voice was firm despite his injuries. "I'm taking you to the territorial marshal myself. You're going to stand trial for murder, fraud, everything, and I'm going to testify against you." Clayton laughed, bitter and broken. "You really think they'll convict me? After 30 years of building relationships, buying loyalties, creating dependencies? I'll be out in 6 months, and you'll be the one who's ruined. He's right." The voice came from the darkness, and everyone turned to see riders approaching, a dozen men on horseback, led by Marshal William Preston. "Clayton Briggs, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, embezzlement, and a host of other charges that, frankly, I'm still cataloging." Caleb stared in disbelief as Preston dismounted, 4 federal deputies with him. "How did you—" "The envelopes. They started arriving 3 days ago. 27 of them, from newspaper editors, citizens, business owners, all containing evidence of criminal activity spanning decades. And then this afternoon, I received a telegram from the Federal Land Office saying they'd gotten similar packages and were launching their own investigation." Preston's expression was grim but satisfied. "You built one hell of a case, Mr. Ward. Airtight, comprehensive, everything I needed to move immediately. But I thought, we were still gathering. Someone else was sending envelopes too. Lots of someones, actually." Preston gestured to his deputies, who moved to secure Clayton and his men. "Your resistance in Redemption Springs? It spread. People in other towns who'd suffered under similar schemes heard what you were doing and started documenting their own experiences. It became a wave, Mr. Ward, a reckoning that went far beyond one corrupt banker in one dying town." Caleb felt his legs go weak with relief and exhaustion. They'd done it. The bluff had become real, the resistance had grown beyond their control, and the weight of evidence had finally become too much for even Clayton's connections to suppress. Clayton was handcuffed and placed on a horse, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. "This isn't over, Ward. I have lawyers, friends in high places, resources you can't imagine. I'll be out before the year ends, and when I am, you'll be an old man with a destroyed reputation and no power," Caleb interrupted. "And we'll still be here, rebuilding what you tried to destroy. Enjoy your trial, Clayton. I hope it takes years." Preston mounted his horse, Clayton secured between 2 deputies. "Mr. Ward, Miss Harper, I'll need formal statements from you both. There'll be a trial, multiple trials probably, and your testimony will be crucial. Can I count on you to appear?" "We'll be there. All of us." Caleb looked at Jeremiah, battered but alive. "Every person he victimized, every family he destroyed, we'll all be there to tell the truth." "Good. Justice works better when victims have voices." Preston tipped his hat. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry I couldn't move faster. Sorry you had to risk everything to force my hand. But you did, and you won. That takes courage most people don't have." They rode away into the darkness, taking Clayton Briggs with them, and suddenly the night felt different, lighter somehow, as if a shadow that had lain over the land for 30 years was finally lifting. Caleb and Jeremiah made their way back to Redemption Springs on foot, arriving just as dawn was breaking. The town was already awake, word of Clayton's arrest having spread with the speed that only small-town gossip could achieve. People lined the streets, their faces showing everything from joy to disbelief to the slow dawning of hope. Lila ran to meet them, and Caleb caught her in his arms, holding her as she cried against his chest. Tears of relief, of exhaustion, of victory finally achieved. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." "It's over." Martha appeared with blankets and coffee, tending to Jeremiah's injuries with practiced efficiency. Samuel was already organizing townspeople to start repairs on the damaged schoolhouse. William Chen and Jacob Morrison were planning a community meeting to discuss how to rebuild without Clayton's corrupt influence shaping every decision. Redemption Springs was coming back to life. The trials began 2 months later and lasted through the winter. Clayton Briggs faced 14 separate indictments covering crimes spanning 3 decades. The evidence was overwhelming. Testimony from hundreds of victims, financial records showing systematic fraud, and finally, reluctantly, the confession of Deputy Marcus Briggs regarding the murders of Byron Jr. and Thomas Harper. Clayton was convicted on all counts. He was sentenced to 40 years in territorial prison, his assets seized to compensate victims, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale about the corrupting nature of unchecked power. The town transformed in his absence. Debts were forgiven or restructured fairly. The bank was taken over by federal administrators and eventually sold to a cooperative owned by local ranchers and business owners. The school reopened with Lila as headmistress, her teaching certification restored with apologies from the territorial board. Jeremiah rebuilt his stable with help from people who'd once been too afraid to offer assistance, and Caleb stayed. He sold his land up north and bought the old Morrison property, which Jacob was happy to sell now that he could afford to start fresh elsewhere. The land wasn't much, 100 acres of stubborn soil and defiant grass, but it was his, and it was home. On a spring morning 6 months after Clayton's arrest, Caleb stood on the porch of the house he'd been building, watching the sun rise over the land that finally felt peaceful. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Lila, still in her nightdress, barefoot on the porch boards. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Too much quiet. I'm not used to it yet." He pulled her close, and she fit against him perfectly, the way she had since the moment they'd stopped fighting for survival and started fighting for a future. "You know what today is?" "How could I forget? It's the day you rode into Redemption Springs planning to leave by sundown." She looked up at him, her eyes bright with emotion. "Instead, you stayed and changed everything." "We changed everything. Together." He took her hand, feeling the simple gold band on her finger. They'd married quietly 2 months ago in Martha's parlor, with Jeremiah and half the town as witnesses. "I have something for you." He pulled a folded document from his pocket and handed it to her. Lila opened it, her eyes scanning the words, and her breath caught. "This is the deed to your property, the school, the house, all of it. Free and clear, transferred to—" She looked up at him in confusion. "To both our names. Caleb, this is mine, my father's legacy. You don't have to—" "I want to. I want us to build something together. Not your legacy or mine, but ours. A place where children learn without fear, where families can grow without debt crushing them, where good people aren't punished for their kindness." He cupped her face in his hands. "I asked you to wait until the war was over before I asked my question. Well, the war's over. We won. And now I'm asking, will you build this life with me? Not just as husband and wife, but as partners in every sense. Will you help me turn this broken town into something worth believing in?" "I already said yes months ago," Lila whispered, tears streaming down her face. "But I'll say it again, as many times as you need to hear it. Yes. To all of it. To everything. Yes." He kissed her as the sun climbed higher, painting the world in shades of gold and promise. Around them, Redemption Springs was waking up, shopkeepers opening their doors, children running toward school, people greeting each other without the weight of fear making them cautious. It wasn't perfect. There were still problems to solve, damage to repair, futures to rebuild. But for the first time in 30 years, those problems felt solvable. The town had remembered what it felt like to stand up, to fight back, to choose courage over compliance. And at the center of it all were two people who'd found each other in the darkest of circumstances and chosen to build something light from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Caleb Ward had ridden into Redemption Springs as a man running from his past, seeking nothing but supplies and solitude. He'd found instead a purpose, a partner, and a home worth fighting for. He'd discovered that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to stand despite it. That justice didn't come from authorities or systems, but from ordinary people refusing to accept injustice as normal. He'd learned that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism weren't dramatic last stands or spectacular victories, but the quiet, grinding work of helping people find their strength, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one stand at a time. Lila pulled back from their kiss and looked toward the town, where smoke was rising from chimneys and the sounds of life filled the morning air. "What do we do now?" Caleb smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. Now we live. We build. We help this town become what it was always meant to be, and we don't let anyone ever take it away again. Sounds like a lot of work. It will be. Years of it, probably. Maybe a lifetime. Good. She took his hand and laced their fingers together. "Because I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you." They stood together on that porch as Redemption Springs came to life around them. Two people who'd transformed from strangers to partners to something deeper than either had words for. The hardened rancher who'd learned to care again. The desperate schoolteacher who'd found her strength. Together, they'd broken a tyrant's grip and given a town back its soul. The frontier was still harsh, still unforgiving, still full of dangers and challenges, but it was also full of possibility, full of people trying to build something better from the raw materials of courage and hope. And in one small town in the Colorado Territory, on land that had known too much suffering and too little justice, that possibility was becoming real. Caleb Ward had stopped running. He'd found his home, his purpose, his future. And as the sun rose higher over Redemption Springs, painting everything in light that felt like redemption itself, he knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The story that had begun with a bullet stopping inches from a woman's heart had ended with two hearts beating in rhythm, building a life worth living from the ruins of what had been. Sometimes the greatest victories weren't won with guns or violence, but with patience, persistence, and the stubborn refusal to let evil win. Sometimes courage looked like standing in an alley defending a stranger. Sometimes it looked like paying a debt you didn't owe. Sometimes it looked like walking into a trap knowing you might not walk out. And sometimes it looked like two people choosing each other, choosing a town, choosing to build something beautiful where ugliness had reigned. Caleb had conquered the wilderness not through dominance or violence, but through connection and care. He'd proven that one person could make a difference, that tyranny could be overthrown, that good people could win if they were brave enough to fight. But more than that, he'd proven something to himself, that the man he'd been didn't have to define the man he'd become. That redemption was possible. That love, when paired with courage, could transform not just individuals, but entire communities. As morning fully broke over Redemption Springs, Caleb Ward stood with his wife on the porch of their home, looking toward a future that was finally, truly, theirs to build. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something he'd thought lost forever. Peace.